Good evening and welcome to Mechanics of the Fourth Wall. Joining myself and Antonio Subrats tonight is JLB. How you doing, John?
I'm very good, thanks, mate. And how are you today?
Absolutely superb, just about recovered. And also Antonio. How you doing, Antonio?
I'm doing great, thank you. All rested.
So, to people joining us, they may think we all seem far too relaxed for what people might be expecting to be a very heated conversation, and far from it. It will be quite the contrary to what people have experienced on the Mechanics of the Fourth Wall with JLB last time. So, to give you a preamble to why this event is happening today, or why this hangout's happening, JLB had about half an hour with us, or with Antonio and myself, after the debate, and pretty much blew both of our minds in terms of some of the information that he actually presented with us. It was a very eye-opening conversation, and that led Antonio certainly into having quite extended conversations on Skype with John and building up a bit more of a friendship. Would you agree, Antonio?
No, not at all.
Oh, right, it's just still total hatred of each other,
No,
like it's
no,
perceived
no.
on the online connections. Is that what?
No, I'm joking, but John and I have spoken very, very briefly on Skype. Well, in fact, we've just written a little bit back and forth. You've been involved in it mainly. But after the debate, we did have a really good chat, and I saw that, as much as people out there see John as an antagonist, I don't. The he's all right. He does use very clever tactics. He is a clever guy, and he does use very clever tactics. And what we're going to do today is we're going to show everybody, not just John, myself, and Nathan. We're going to show how we can use our faculties to determine certain aspects of the world, especially in areas where we can really research, like history. That's why today's show is on history, hoaxed history.
Well, this is something that I've been criticised for in comments, and it's through ignorance that I want to be involved in these conversations, because it's something that I don't steer away from because I'm frightened of the topic. In fact, in the case of the Holohoax, I'm absolutely fascinated by it because of the level of deception that's afoot, and I don't know a great deal about it, whereas after that debate, that was one of the topics that came up. And I know, Antonio, you'll agree when I've said I've tried to discuss this with a couple of other people, and because it's a hot topic, they don't want to cover it, and they'll give their reasons and they'll dance around it. And I'm not going to name and shame anybody, but ultimately, I can understand why they wouldn't want to talk about it. But to me, it's just another layer of the onion. It's just another load of bullshit we've been handed. In the case of the Holohoax, that astonishes me when you start picking it apart, like any of these hoax events. I know we did 9/11 and Sandy Hook, and JLB describes these as baby hoaxes, which is almost kind of made me chuckle.
Well, it's a sacred cow. That's what the Holocaust is. And this will be, some people out there might find this offensive, not just because I look like shit today, but the whole idea that people might have lied about what went on in the concentration camps. People see it a little bit like the people who believe that 9/11 was conducted by Osama bin Laden and all those people died, and questioning it is, a dastardly thing to do, is a dishonor to those who died. I think the absolute opposite. The people who question 9/11, who try to get to the bottom of it, are trying to honor those who died. Shit, sorry. The people who question 9/11 are actually trying to get to the bottom of it in order to honor those who really died, the majority of whom were the rescue workers who died well afterwards, okay? But they still died as a result of 9/11. The same with the Holocaust. People really did die in concentration camps. People died on the streets too, and to say that you're not allowed to look into it because you're doing a disservice to people who might not have existed or might not have died, that's not on. You're making a sacred cow, and let's not worship sacred cows.
But like with any story, it's the why that's important. Why?
John, do you want to pick it up?
Yeah, sorry, I had to leave at the start there because the other computer was going, so I had to turn that off. But it's good to be here. And just a couple of things. You talk about how I'm here because we had that chat after the debate, and it turns out there might be a few areas where we don't disagree as much as we do about, say, the shape of the Earth. And one of the things that I've been trying to do for the 2 years now that I've been doing this work is try and find the overlap. So most people, there are things that they've got in common with other people. Then the question is, do they focus on where they disagree, especially when it's not constructive, or do they focus on where they agree? So most of the people in the live chat right now, they agree that history from 15 years ago is fake history. The history book says that some guy in a cave who looked a little bit like me, but worse, with a big beard, plotted to have 19 men with box cutters fly planes into the World Trade Center towers. And that actually happened, and the towers came down, and thousands of people died. So most of the people in the live chat would agree with me when I say that history is fake history. So the question then is, how much of history do you go through and try and see, does this story actually make sense? So I didn't know that you guys wanted to talk about the whole hoax today, but I'm happy to. I think that's an important topic to talk about. But it goes back further than that. And so what I'm hoping to do is to encourage people to just go and look into why they believe what they believe. And a good example was we had Russian Vids on my impromptu chat about a week ago. And Russian Vids is a very interesting character. I'm sure most of the people in the live chat are familiar with Russian Vids. He says that he still believes in the Bible. So I said to him, all right, then, well, maybe the Bible's legitimate. When do you think the Bible was written? He says to me, 2,000 years ago. And I think to myself, 2,000 years ago, really? Well, let me show you a few examples of what I've found looking into the Bible that lead me to conclude that perhaps the Bible is a more recent fictional creation, you see? So if I put that evidence on the table and you walk away and you say, no, I still believe the Bible is 2,000 years old, hey, that's cool. You've got to believe whatever you want to believe. I'm going to believe whatever I want to believe. But if more people say, well, let's just look at the evidence, then we've got more evidence to choose from. And then the people who might change their mind about these things, they've got more evidence to work with. So if we can discuss those kind of things on this show, then I think that'll be fantastic. And I'm sure most people are happy to listen to it. And to the few who aren't, because they've got certain impressions of me from my views on the shape of the Earth and that sort of thing, that's fair enough as well. Like, you can't force people to listen to, but those who want to listen, hopefully we can give them a good show today.
Yeah, cool. If I can just jump in right now and say, on the chat, on the preamble before we actually went live, we met a friend of John's. I don't want to say his name in case he doesn't want it said. He's a flat earther. We met him. We're chatting with him. Okay. So John right now is there. He's got a companion who's a flat earther. You know. So, you know, the idea that John might be the eternal antagonist to flat Earth. No. You know, he's a human being, and his flat Earth friend who's there is also a human being. We're all human beings, and we all have the right to question stuff. You know, not just the Holocaust. I mean, Nathan, I personally, I would have started with dinosaurs and other things, and you know, built up to the Holocaust. But Nathan's just, you know, waterboarding us. So,
well, I don't want to dance around it. It's one of those things that where people are really, what's the word, vehement in the comments when they say, why aren't you looking into this? It's the same with things like banking. And I want to be honest and say, I'm ignorant. I don't know enough about this stuff. So when you come across someone like John LeBon and they start telling you about it, my eyes widen and I want to hear more. And you go, and the more you hear, the more shocked you are at what you hear. And you general ideas. It happened tonight. I was telling you about a guy when I was out with, I can't name and shame these people. I got a German guy who knew nothing about Auschwitz. Basically, that's the crux of the story.
You were in Germany. You were in Germany with your boss.
Yeah, basically. And I asked, why doesn't he know anything about Auschwitz?
Wait, Nathan, wait. Tell them the story as you told it me, because it just illustrates it much clearer.
Well, I asked, what do you know about Auschwitz? The guy said they make good beer there. And later I asked my boss, well, why doesn't he know anything about Auschwitz? That seems really odd. And the boss said, well, it's because the parents they don't tell these stories because they're too horrific, so they don't know anything about it. And tonight, Antonio's response to that was,
I don't know, I've forgotten. Maybe I'm not well rested.
They don't know because nothing happened there.
Yeah. It's not that nothing happened. It's that the enormous crime that we're told happened, that did not happen. What happened was something absolutely abhorrent, but it wasn't the gas chambers, the ovens. That situation didn't happen. And you know, you can listen to me and say you're talking nonsense, or you can say, oh yes, I've heard something similar. I'd urge you, like so many other people out there, don't listen to me. Go and look yourself. Go to freaking Auschwitz if you need to. Go and look at how things are laid out. Look at the survivors. Look at the thousands of survivors and listen to their story, because you know, for the Nuremberg trials, there were thousands of people who gave testimony, but they only picked 7 to actually speak. Now, these 7 talked about gas chambers. The other thousands didn't mention gas chambers. There are British historians, there are clergy, there are people around the world. There's a guy an academic in France who was jailed for this. In Germany, it's against the law to question or talk about the Holocaust as having not happened. But to question it, to investigate it, is a crime. Now, this is we live in an age of deceit, and to say that investigating something is a crime, you know, for the people in the US who say that you're living under a police state, you're allowed to question 9/11 in the US. You're not living in a police state. Germany is a police state where you cannot question things. The UK is a police state where we cannot question things. We can't question the Woolwich murder of that supposed soldier who was decapitated in the middle of the street with no blood. There are certain things that we can't question. When you're in a police state, it's not marching troops of soldiers around the streets. It's the mentality that makes it a police state. I grew up in a police state, and I remember what it was like. I genuinely grew up in Franco Spain towards the end, when everything became really fractured. I know what a police state is like. So when you look at the world and what you're willing to question and what you're willing to just keep as a sacred cow, you know, maybe you want to look and examine your ideas of the world and your beliefs and see which of your perceived knowledge is actually a belief that's masquerading as knowledge. And before we came on, we were discussing this with John, and John made a really good point. He said, when you remove people's beliefs, you cause a vacuum. Do you want to pick it up, John?
Yeah, well, the point I was making was, suppose it is the case that we're lied to about a lot of things in our existence, okay? Whether it is the Earth that we live on, what was living on this Earth 66 million years ago, how we came to be humans, what weapons are used in wars, what actually happened in the wars, any of these things. These are fundamental beliefs to who we are. And so if you can point out to someone that they've been lied to about that stuff, or even just say, yeah, that's the story you believe, but did you know that that story is based on these other stories? They don't teach you till you get to university. By then, you've already been indoctrinated, so you're not going to challenge it. Did you know that a good example is the Cavendish experiment. Okay, you believe that we all live on a giant spinning ball going around the sun. Totally sweet. You know, you can go to Wikipedia. It says that Mars weighs 6 point whatever times 10 to the 20 whatever kilograms. So that's its mass or its density, whatever. Do you know that that all comes back to this Cavendish experiment where a guy in a shed, before he even had a light bulb, was able, with a contraption that he made, to determine the mass of the Earth? Did you know that? So you point these things out, and the majority of people will just sort of go about their day. But some people will be smart enough or curious enough to go, well, that can't be true. How could one man weigh the entire Earth? That's just silly. They go and they look into it. Before long, they don't believe that we know how much Mars weighs anymore. Do you know what I mean? What its mass is. I have to be careful with my terminology because the heliocentrists might be listening. So anyway, you get what I'm trying to say, right? Suddenly there's a big vacuum because so much of what they believed is gone now. And as humans, whether it's a natural thing or it's part of their conditioning, we've been conditioned to hold many beliefs. People go around their whole day believing all kinds of things all the time. The idea of not knowing and saying, well, I don't know. It could be this, it could be that, I don't know. I might lean this way, I might lean that way, but I don't know. I don't need to believe anything. To most people, that's alien and foreign. So they've got this big vacuum, and it's very easy once someone's beliefs have been taken away for that vacuum to be filled by anybody else. Now, those other people who fill that vacuum could be trying to give you what they think is good knowledge. They could say, well, I found out that was a lie, but here's what I've now found with my own research, and it could be true. They might believe what they're saying, and it might be true. They might believe what they're saying, and it's not true. They might not believe what they're saying, and they're taking advantage of a vulnerable person. because a person whose foundational beliefs have been taken away from them is very vulnerable. I mean, look at the world that we live in. A person who you take away the lies, what are they left with? Not very much, right? So that they could just be charlatans or shysters taking advantage of vulnerable people. So this all, I mean, we're all learning. This is a fascinating journey, isn't it? Even just this flat Earth Renaissance thing that's been going on for 15 months, whether you believe the Earth is flat or it's a giant spinning ball or anything else, just the social dynamics and watching how people react as they go through this and as they get into, you know, certain social groups or the way that they treat other people. It's fascinating just from like I guess like a psychological perspective or this like a sociological perspective, I guess, just looking at how humans react when something we were all taught that we live on a giant spinning ball, and people my age, the Big Bang Theory was in by then. That was now, well, that's what happened. It was just this big bang, you know what I mean? Billions of years ago, that's just what happened, you know what I mean? So that was already in by then. So when you see people that's taken away from them, how do they then react? I would suggest that most people, that vacuum gets filled very quickly, usually by the person who took away the old belief, you see? And so when we're talking about history, the point I was making before we went on there was I now feel I need to be more careful in what I'm doing rather than say, well, here's the research that I've done, here's the conclusion I've come to, it's yours now. I'm more careful to say, well, if you take the time looking into this, this, and this, here's what I suspect you might find. That way, the only people who are likely to do it, they'll be doing it themselves, they'll be doing the research themselves, there'll be nobody else around to say, aha, now that you don't believe that, here's this other story. If they just do it themselves and get rid of the nonsense first, they're by themselves, then they're less likely to be taken advantage of by any charlatan who is taking away the old beliefs to fill in with new lies. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There was one comment I saw from somebody that said that you were, I can't remember how it was phrased, but they were saying that what you were doing was tantamount to an old-fashioned book burning, and I don't know. It's a kind of strange concept when you think of it in that way, because there's a bit of I ask people the question, how much of it is bullshit? What percentage is lies? And it gets ever and ever closer to sort of, you know, the three-figure number. You know, it all being complete nonsense. But then when someone says, well, let's look at that skeptically, is there any truth in it? How much of the woven web of lies is truth? Because there's always got to be a degree of truth in there. But as soon as you mix in lies, do you throw the whole thing out? It's hard to know where to start and where to end in terms of what you discard.
Well, one of the things we should all be aware of, you know, everybody in the audience, anybody listening to this now, we should all be aware of how we were misled by believing what we were told by authority figures, be that NASA, teachers, clergy, parents, anybody who told us something that we believed. It seems like the problem is with the concept of belief itself, not with the people telling us things, because they believed the things that were telling us too. Apart from the shysters and the charlatans, there are those who told us about the heliocentric model, the orbital mechanics, who believed those things. So altogether, I think if we've learned anything, if this serves to teach anything to humanity or to the individual, is to not believe people, not believe things. You know, go and look for yourself, check things for yourself. Anybody who comes to you with a belief, they're just giving you their opinion or their interpretation of their own experience. They could have read a book, believed that it was true, turned out it was fiction. I read Carlos Castaneda's The Teachings of Don Juan. Turns out it's supposed to be real, like really was real kind of thing. Was it really real? Was it his interpretation of the events? Did any of it actually happen? Was Catch-22 real? Was it all made up? You can believe anything you want, but knowledge is a different thing. And first, before you can arrive at knowledge, you have to empty your beliefs. You know, I don't want to do my Chinese accent, but like Bruce Lee said, you have to empty the cup before you can fill it with knowledge. Because when you have beliefs residing in your mind, you know, they're not going to shift. The beliefs are not going to make way for knowledge. It's not an exercise we're accustomed to doing, because first we have to discover that the belief was false and shift it, and that's where cognitive dissonance comes in, because as John said, you know, when our fundamental beliefs are part of what we base our sense of identity on. And when those things are shifted, you know, we can face big problems. This is what the point of propaganda is, to mold and shift beliefs in the population. And when we're talking about people like John, me, Nathan, any other flat earther friends of yours, we don't have authority. We don't have the tools to engage in incremental shifting of perspective like propaganda does. So you have to think for yourself and just question things. You know, question your religion. You know, question your belief in history. Did dinosaurs exist? How long was the theory of the Big Bang developed? How long ago was the flat earth established in the Bible? How old is the Bible? Who wrote these things? Who wrote the book of Job? All of these things. If you can't find the answer,
piqued my interest that John was speaking about, sorry to just grab John's attention for a sec, was you were saying about the people themselves after the debate. You said some of the people that we hold as historic purveyors of evidence may not exist at all. The people themselves may be fictitious.
Well, they might be. And so what I've spent a lot of time doing is just looking into, well, what is the official story, and then working my way back from there. So if a man wrote a book in the 1980s saying that this character from 1,000 years ago said this or that, okay, cool. What were his references? What were his sources? Right? Find his sources, then find out what their sources were, and just trace it back, go as far back as you can, which is like one basic element of the historical method, is finding out the primary sources, the secondary sources, and so on. And so in doing that, I've come to a position now where I'm very skeptical of a lot of the characters that we're told are true, and we're just expected to take them as being true for granted. This man 2,000 years ago said this man 2,000 years ago did that. Well, maybe he did. I'm not saying they didn't. What I'm saying is, by looking into where do these claims originally come from, because a textbook written by Millen or whoever in 2000, obviously they weren't there to see that this guy said this, so they will have references or sources. Like, what's their reference or source that leads to them saying that this guy said this thing 2,000 years ago? And so you look at that source, you look at that source. It's easy to believe in your mind that if you did that, you get back to the original guy saying it. They're basing it all on what they've got from that guy. It's easy to believe that, until you start looking into the sources for yourself and you realize it doesn't work that way at all. A lot of the characters that we have in our head, we might not even realize it, but in our mind we've got images that were given to us from television, and we've kind of put together this character in our mind, very similar to how the average human without television would have a character who they did meet, who came to their village or whatever. We don't realize how much of what's in our mind has been put there from images on the screen. And so if you take the time to just sit there and go, right, here's a story that I find interesting, whether it is one of the ancient Greeks, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's whatever, and say, right, this story could be real. It might be. Let's just work our way back from the official story today through to the primary sources and see what we can come up with. And if people do that, and I understand that most people won't, that's cool. We've all got our own ideas of what's an interesting thing to do with our time. That's cool. But the people who take the time to do that, by the end of that process, they're not going to believe, in many cases, what they believed at the start, because most of those beliefs came from the television or from movies. So many of our beliefs about so many things, whether we realize it or not, comes straight from a television. And I'm not sure how the televisions work now, but it wasn't long ago they were 30 frames a second, right? So you have someone sitting there in their lounge room and they're getting beamed 30 frames a second. They can watch a half-an-hour documentary about World War II, do the maths about how many images have just been beamed into their head. Okay, now whether you believe in creation or you believe in evolution, that's a lot of images that have been put into a human's head. Humans who have no mechanism against it, right? Whether you believe in creation or evolution, humans didn't have these images being beamed into their head. So they might think that they were taught that something happened at a certain time by an esteemed scholar. They might think that. But actually the images in their mind were largely put there by television. And you can name any historical event, chances are the person who is talking about it hasn't read a book on the topic. And even if they have, it's a secondary or tertiary source. It's not even a primary source document. Okay, so people can tell you, oh, this great leader or this terrible leader, whatever the case is, did this or did that. Chances are they've never read that person's autobiography. Do you know what I mean? Chances are. In some cases they have, and then you can start having an interesting conversation. But most of the people you speak to haven't even read the autobiographies of the characters who they'll say was a great person or a terrible person. So you're working with people whose beliefs aren't actually based on primary evidence. So how can someone like me who tries to base his beliefs on primary evidence even have a conversation with them? We're talking past one another. They've got a story from someone else about somebody, whereas I've tried to go and find the primary source, his actual account. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, there's going to be exceptions in every rule, but with Cavendish, it kind of doesn't conform to that because to me, I'd never heard of him. You know, I'm sure a lot of people would say the same. It's not like he's presented to us and propagandized like Einstein or one of these scientific celebrities. We get modern day equivalents. I won't go through the list, but Cavendish is kind of different. It's one where you research into it and they're teaching it in the higher levels of school, but we're only researching it in a kind of debunking way. It's a kind of weird way to come across someone like this who's so important, especially in the heliocentric model.
Well, with Cavendish, like, you can just take his story on face value because you can download a PDF of his experiment, if you like, and just take it on face value. And I still think that's an interesting exercise because when you see what the official story is of how you can go to Wikipedia and find out the mass of Mars, when you find out the official story, you can take the Cavendish one on face value. Maybe this guy 200 years ago really did try and perform this experiment as we're told, and the rest of science followed from it. Like, even if the story of Cavendish is a true story, he actually did exist and he did do the experiment and all the rest of it, which I am happy to take on face value. That still has interesting corollaries for our current understanding of where we live. But if you go back more than a couple of hundred years ago, very quickly, it's very hard to even take people on face value because there is no face value of their primary work. There is no primary work, you see. So it's, well, this man said this, some other guy wrote about it, some other guy wrote about it, we found the writings a couple hundred years ago, and here's what we know. You know what I mean? So Cavendish, I'm happy to take on face value. Like, I don't know if he existed or not, but I'm happy to assume for the sake of argument that he did. But more than a couple hundred years ago, it gets difficult to even do that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are things that we can look at now, for instance, like dinosaurs. It's impossible for any of us to go into the cellars, the basement of the national museums and look at any of their treasure trove. That's not going to happen. But there are people out there who have done this because they have the correct credentials. And what they found, what they have reported, is that there's no such thing as a dinosaur skull, for instance. Not one, never. There's never been the skull of any dinosaur ever found. In fact, there's never been a complete skeleton or even a modicum of any kind of complete skeleton found. So when you think this, like I do, okay, I haven't been to the basement. If I went to the basement of the National History Museum and found a great big skeleton and I had the equipment to test and it was all genuine bona fide bone, it hasn't been melted and recreated in a lab in China, which is something that actually does happen, then I would think, hey, even if it had the skull missing, I think, yeah, okay, this thing looks like it must have had some kind of head, okay? But that's not what we have in the real world. But what the authorities do is they make sure that they have a stumbling block there for anybody trying to find this, which is basically you don't have the authority. You're not authorized to enter beyond this door. And that's what they do. So whenever something is guarded by authority, we have to question, why is authority guarding this? Why isn't authority doing the opposite and displaying it? Why aren't they
back onto the why? I mean, before the show went out, you were talking about reparations when it came to the Holler hoax, and I'll bring it back to that later. But with dinosaurs, again, there's a very specific why. Maybe John, you want to give us the why of dinosaurs? What's the point? Why lie about them? Why are they needed?
Yeah, why would someone lie about these creatures existing 66 million years ago and more than that, and teach it to children? I think for different people, their interests will be different. And so right now, I think the majority of people who teach that dinosaurs existed, they fully believe it. It's not a lie to them. I think for the vast majority of paleontologists or archaeologists today, the stories they tell of dinosaurs in their minds are completely real stories. There's no lie involved. Now, if you can go back 150 years to the 1940s or the 1950s with the Bone Wars and these sorts of things, when the whole dinosaur story was getting big, what was their motivation? Was it purely financial? Did these guys believe their stories? I don't really pretend to know with the dinosaurs how it all got kicked off. But today, I think most people who teach the dinosaurs are real, they fully believe it. In their mind, it's just as real as the bishop teaching that the story from the book is more than a fable. Do you know what I mean? Like, in their mind, it's completely real. So I think a lot of the time there's no lying involved. The people telling the story completely believe it. What are the consequences of their stories? Well, by having the dinosaur story there, it helps the story of evolution. And one of the things that Dubé in his book talks about really well is the connection between the evolution story and the dinosaur story, that both came about around about the same time. So if you've got this story of the dinosaurs, hey, the dinosaurs evolved over millions, billions, whatever it was, years to become these big giant creatures. They're not here anymore, but we evolved as well. Like, the two things go hand in hand. And if you think about it, you're taught about the heliocentric story the same time you're taught about dinosaurs. I still remember, it was either in grade 1 or grade 2, because I was in like a composite class, I guess, where we were taught about dinosaurs. We spent a whole term. We have 4 terms per year in Australia. One of our main subjects for a whole term was dinosaurs, and that was in early primary school. Now, how come we're getting taught about dinosaurs around about the same time that we're getting taught, how to use English? Like, we're still getting taught basic English at that stage, but we're also getting taught the dinosaur story. Well, one of the consequences of having it done that way might be that it makes us more receptive to the idea that we're not special things that were put here for a purpose. We just evolved by accident the same way as the dinosaurs, and hey, we might go the same way they did, just bang, all over. So I can't, like any particular individual, I can't tell you why they're saying the stories they're saying. Some of them believe their stories, some of them don't. This dinosaur story started 150 years ago or so the people behind starting it, I can't pretend for a moment to know their motivations. All I can see now is the consequences of that story, and one of the consequences is there's millions of people out there who fully believe that they, human beings, just got here by accident. They completely believe they're here by accident. They believe everything else is here by accident. And more than that, they believe that it could all just disappear like that in an instant, same way it did for the dinosaurs. And so if you think about the consequence of that worldview on the way that they live their life, it's dramatic. If you can convince people that there's no purpose for them being here, it was all an accident, if you can convince them of that, then they're pretty much yours to do whatever you want to do with them from that point on. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you guys remember when you first learned about dinosaurs? I remember, okay, we had this magazine. I don't know if it was released around the world, but in Australia you could buy this magazine where every edition came with another piece. And over the course of buying the magazines, you made a T-Rex, right? Yeah. And so it sucked the kids in because you would want to get each edition to finish your T-Rex. The parents would buy it thinking, oh, it's only $5, and hey, the kids are learning something at science, I guess, so perfect marketing ploy. And by the end, you get your T-Rex. And that came out around about the same time that I was learning about dinosaurs at school. So I still remember a lot of being taught about dinosaurs. And it wasn't being taught, well, here's what they found 150 years ago. Most of the bones that those guys claim they found, many of the species have since been rescinded. They're not even pretending those are real anymore. They were just real at the time, but now we know better. You know what I mean? They don't teach any of that. It's, here were these dinosaurs, how cool they were, and the Stegosaurus and all this crap, right? They're just stories. Now, they might be stories based on truth, but they never spend the time explaining to us what the truth is to justify the stories. They're just stories. So I remember it really well. Do you? I mean, Nathan, do you remember when you were first taught about dinosaurs?
Yeah, kind of. I vaguely remember a Disney movie called One of Our Dinosaurs is Missing. I recently found out that it was actually filmed in I think it's the Natural History Museum. And the way I came to the dinosaur hoax was through my wife. So she started questioning it, and then we ended up going to the museum and asking a few questions and shooting a bit of video. I think I'm right in saying that allegedly Dave did pretty similar sort of thing. And I think you've done a video that was very similar as well, John. But you just go and poke around a little bit and come to some very quick conclusions about what you're actually looking at, which is nonsense and hokum. None of the stuff that's presented to you in the museum in that regard is actually real, to the degree where at the Natural History Museum, I will get back to my child bit, but yeah, the guy was telling us they're having to get rid of it. They're going to replace it with the blue whale because it's not real. So they openly confess that the stuff's fake as all hell. But my first memories are of that movie with them stealing a dinosaur from the Natural History Museum. That one of our dinosaurs is missing.
Do you remember? Sorry, Nate, Anthony. Do you remember a movie called The Land Before Time? In the live chat, Tyson Miller says The Land Before Time was the first time he remembers dinosaurs being presented to him. The Land Before Time was one of my favourite films, right? And it was a story of these four dinosaurs, all with different characters. You've got your main protagonist, the long neck, who loses his mother. So straight, I mean, it's pretty full on. It's little children watching a story about a dinosaur losing his mother. Like, that's a pretty full-on emotional thing for a child to know. So they empathise with this little dinosaur, the long neck, who loses his mother. Then you've got Ducky, like the peppy girl. Then you've got the yep. Then you've got Sarah, like the aggressive, like tomboy Triceratops. Then you've got Petrie, like the nervous, scared dinosaur. So you've got all these characters. Children are going to find one or more of those characters to relate to. Then you go on this journey with them. You go on this journey with these dinosaurs. So for people my age, and maybe Tyson's about the same age as me, I'm not sure, this was not just like, whether it was their first exposure to the idea of dinosaurs or not, this 90-minute movie, whatever it was, would have a very powerful effect on what they think about dinosaurs. To them, it becomes a real thing. These are real characters they're relating to. And so Tyson Miller in the live chat says that was his first exposure to dinosaurs. If people spend time just thinking about it, when did you, like, what's your earliest memories of dinosaurs? There's a very good chance it's going to be a movie from Hollywood. And you guys can see the significance of that.
Yeah.
It gets worse. It gets worse because I watched this at my brother's house the other day, and he's got a couple of year old and a 1-year-old, and the girl who's a couple of years old was watching a U-rated, now in the British certification system, that's like universal for all, and it's got animation, kiddie animation, admittedly, but dinosaurs biting the heads off of the dinosaurs. It's very gory. And when I watched it, I remember thinking back to when the original Jurassic Park came out, and seeing it at the cinema, and going, this is a film rated PG, parental guidance. So as long as you've got your parents' permission, you can pretty much go in. As long as you can walk into the cinema, you know, in the UK, you could go and watch it. And I'm a hi-fi enthusiast, and the audio and the visuals of Jurassic Park, if you were, let's say, 8 years old, would be so overstimulating and terrifying, because it's an absolutely frightening film, especially the scene with the T-Rex when he's pushing them over the side of a cliff. It is truly, you know, mind-meltingly horrific. And to expose children to that, to give it a PG rating, to me, it's as horrifying as an Alien movie in terms of how much it scares me now when I watch Jurassic Park. That to some might seem farcical, but to me, I think back to when I was much younger and that film came out, and it was genuinely scary. The massive amounts of sub-bass from the dinosaur walking. Now I think about it, and it's laughable because you think of the proportions of that thing, and it wouldn't even be able to stand up when you think about it now. But of course, when they replicate it with giant models, especially on the original compared to the new stuff, it was models, and they are very, very realistic and scary, which dinosaurs are.
That's the point of them. The dinosaurs are really there to appeal to boys, you know, because we all know that boys are more driven towards the sciences, and you know that generally dinosaurs are aimed more to boys. As sexist as that is, part of the way things are driven into the consciousness, not just through the emotive tales, you know, like losing the mother. They did the same with Bambi, you know, but they also did the whole stress conditioning with E.T., you know. Now, there's no chance an alien like E.T. could build, you know, anything like that spaceship, because the hands, you know, were too clumsy. But, you know, they had that emotional. When things are addressed to boys or men, the language that's used is different to the language that's used towards women. For women, the propaganda is regarding vaccinations or being policed by other women. To men, things are a bit more aimed at the man. So, for instance, we'll have wording like, dinosaurs don't exist. So obviously, now that obviously, you know, that calls to the man, okay? He doesn't want to be outside of the obvious. He doesn't want to. If he doesn't agree, he's going to be laughed at. Okay, so obviously dinosaurs aren't around anymore. They must have died from some reason. So could the reason have been a natural disaster? Could it have been a celestial body crashing onto the Earth? And what this does is it just buries into the unconscious the notion that dinosaurs existed in the first place, just with the word obviously. So obviously they died. What killed them? Come on, men, problem solve. Let's arrive at a conclusion where we don't want to be killed. Lucky for you, you're a scientist. We can make a satellite that will destroy any meteorite that could destroy the human race, like it did the dinosaurs. And so goes the story. It's always neurolinguistic programming with images, words, and emotions. That's how it goes. And that's what we see. So anytime anybody's using those mechanisms regarding anything, you know, Syria, the Jews, the Nazis, anybody who's using that kind of ploy, you should. It would be great if, as humans, we could develop an instinct for bullshit sniffing, and when we hear those kind of terms, just go, this is a bullshit warning. I'm going to take what this person is saying with a large pinch of salt and look into it properly rather than believe. Because let's face it, nobody believes their own government when they say, you know, the Russians are coming. Nobody would take up arms, you know, and then we wouldn't have war, would we?
We've used the word belief about 1 million times. So I want both of your definition of what a belief actually is, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. John, you were going to...
John first. Sorry, Antonio, he's the guest.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think this is a good point, and it's probably worth, like, it would have been worth even discussing this, like, at the start, just so people get an idea of what we mean by these things. But, I mean, if there are some things that are self-evident truths, okay? So you can walk up to a tree, you can touch the tree, it's a solid physical object. That's a self-evident truth, okay? Now, people might try and get into a semantic argument about, well, what's solid or what's physical or what have you, and that's just semantics. But you know, as a person, you can walk up to that tree, you can't get through the tree, you're going to have to go around it, okay? That's a self-evident truth. That's one example. There are many all around us all of the time. The thing is, a lot of what education deals with for those 12 or 13 years that we're there, it deals with more abstract things, such as what's out there in space or what happened 60 million years ago or how we got there. These are more abstract things. So it's no longer self-evident. You're going to need other types of evidence for it. And so ideally, things that aren't self-evident, you're going to build up an evidence base to believe in these things. Do you see what I mean? And so when I say that I believe that I can't get through the tree, well, it's not just a belief. It seems like an objective truth. Does that make sense? Whereas when I say, if I say to you, I want you to believe that 19 men were responsible for what happened on 1911 with box cutters, all of a sudden that becomes a belief that we might be able to look at evidence that goes for or against it. So belief is in something that will affect your understanding of the world around you, that kind of belief. So if I sit here and I say, there's lots of things that I used to believe I no longer believe, I'm not saying I've replaced those beliefs with other beliefs. I've just stopped having a strong belief about it. I'm still open to both possibilities. It is still theoretically possible to me that 19 men with box cutters were responsible for what happened on 9/11. It seems to me the chances of that being true, infinitesimally small, but it's theoretically possible. And so I think what happens is a lot of people, we get given a whole bunch of beliefs when we're young, and that just becomes our main, like, that's just how we are from that point on. We've got lots and lots of beliefs. People can come along and change one belief to another belief, but we still hold lots of beliefs. Whereas what I've been doing for the last couple of years, I guess, whether I realized it or not at the start, I do now, is really I've just been undoing a lot of the beliefs and a lot of this notion that you have to hold strong beliefs one way or another, because I don't think that you do. I think on big questions such as how we got here, you can say, well, that story, look at all the problems with that story. I don't believe that story. It doesn't mean I've then got to give you another story. If you want stories, go and find your own stories. I'm saying I no longer believe any of the stories I've been given. So when I say belief, I mean I no longer have in my mind an explanation that I think is a true one for how we got here. I've got ideas about what might have happened, but I can't tell you that I believe that we got here because this happened or that happened. I don't believe anything about how we got here. I don't know how we got here. Does that make sense? So that when I say belief, that's the kind of framework that I'm dealing with when I use that term, Antonio. Does that? I hope I'm making this. It's very early here. I had one coffee.
Yes, you're definitely making sense. What I look at it from maybe a simpler level. I like to boil things down to nuts and bolts. For me, it helps me, deal with the world. So I say my perception of belief is that belief is something that you hold until you have knowledge. And the problem is, when you do hold a belief, we're not used to shifting a belief and replacing it with knowledge. We require a lot of knowledge to increment, and especially if it's knowledge that just incrementally changes that belief to the point that it's no longer a belief, but it's now knowledge. But usually that's not the case. Usually you will have a belief, and then you'll be presented with something that should sit in your mind as knowledge, but it won't be accommodated because belief is there. So, for instance, all the globelings, they can't shift from the spinning planet flying through space. They can't shift from that because it's such a strongly held belief. I believed that, at some point I stopped believing it. Before that, I'd already realized that the word belief itself is an archaic term. We're still using it now, but belief denotes ignorance. It denotes lack of knowledge. Like, the word ignorance is not just being rude. It means not having knowledge. That's what the word ignorance means. So if you have lots of beliefs, then you have lots of ignorance. That's pretty much what you're saying, Now, you can have lots of beliefs and lots of knowledge. So yeah, in terms of the knowledge, you're not so ignorant, but in terms of your beliefs, you are. So when somebody says they believe or they don't believe, what they're actually saying is, I don't know about this, but I'm going to have an opinion. Or I don't know about this, but I'm going to say that it's not true. So belief is simply an archaic term that we haven't grown out of. And it's about time we did. It's about time we started saying, honestly, I don't know. When somebody asks you a question, say, I don't know. Instead of walking around with beliefs, when somebody asks you a question, you answer it with your belief. Well, that's just gibberish. And we have this. We know that there are Christians out there, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, people of all kinds of different religions, all of which believe that theirs is correct, which they know means that all the others aren't. So it's like, let's start to not believe things. Let's start to not believe what the media. Let's start to not believe history. Let's start to not believe things. And when we start to not believe things, we want to replace those things with knowledge. And you can arrive at knowledge about things. There are certain things you can't arrive at knowledge about. And you have to just be willing, man enough or woman enough to say, yeah, I will never actually know that. But there are lots of things in life about which you can have knowledge. And when you have a belief, it's nothing but an obstacle. So that's
when you look at the average person, right? Suppose they wake up, they know that when they press this button, their kettle's going to come on, okay? And they know that when they go to the bus stop at this time, most of the time a bus is going to come within a few minutes of a certain time. They know that at work they've got to go to this place to get this file, blah, 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 right? Most of their life is spent physically dealing with things that they do know or they've got good reason to believe. Yesterday when they did that, that happened. The day before, everything they remember, things follow a certain pattern, right? So many of these things you could argue, well, it's knowledge or it's belief or what have you. Why they've only been to that bus stop twice. Why do they believe it's going to come today? Like there's this, you could almost get into a semantic argument about, well, what is knowledge and what is belief. The point is, most people during their everyday life, most of the things they're dealing with are pretty obviously true. It's only when you get into these more abstract realms that this term belief becomes more important. Okay, so things like, why are we here? Where are we? Who are we? What was here before us? What's coming next? This is more abstract in the sense that even if my belief were true objectively, how am I going to prove that to you? At best, I can give you the evidence that I've used, the logic that I'm using, and then you can interrogate that. And that was, I don't really want to go into it too much, but say looking at some of the debates that I've had over the 2 years that I've been here, this has been one of the things I've done where I've said, well, you just tell me what your evidence is and like your logic here, and if that's enough for you, that's fine. If it's not enough for me, hopefully that's fine for you as well. And I think one of the problems that I see with this scene on YouTube at the moment is a lot of people are saying, you believe this, I believe that. Until you believe what I believe, I'm not finished yet. Whereas I would say, well, you can believe what you want, especially if it makes you happy. And you can believe what you want, especially if it makes you happy. I'm going to believe what I think I've got enough evidence for. If you're going to bring me evidence and reason, then maybe I'll start believing what you believe. But if I don't believe what you believe, I don't see the problem here, especially if you're happy with your beliefs. And a lot of people out there, they seem fairly happy with their beliefs, no matter how ridiculous they are to me. So there are some people, they really enjoy collecting Star Wars figurines. They really enjoy this notion that, maybe one day they could be, maybe one day there'll be humans on this ship, floating through space, and they really believe in space too. Like they're happy believing that there's space out there, and maybe there's whatever. If they're truly happy with all of that, I'm not going to go out of my way to take those beliefs away from them. What difference does it make to me? Chances are, if they believe all of that stuff, they're probably not really interested in what I'm trying to do with my YouTube channel and my website anyway. You see what I mean? So I would just leave them alone. And some of those people, if we're being honest, might even be happier than me. So what right do I have to go up and say, oh, you believe in space? Why do you believe in space? You've watched too much Star Wars. Man, if they're happy, what right do I have to go and try and take that away from them? Do you see what I mean? And I think a lot of people, it's like atheism. It's like Richard Dawkins, this militant atheism where it's like, no, we have to beat the drums of atheism and, even if atheism were like a legitimate or a worthwhile belief system, even if it were, the idea that you would go around and try and take away other people's belief systems that make them happy just for your own gratification, that to me doesn't make sense. And that's the beauty of YouTube. I can put a video up there. If you want to watch it, watch it. If you get 5 minutes in, click off. It's no problem. You know what I mean? I'm not coming into, I don't go to other people's Google Hangouts and jump in there and start going, hey this, hey that, hey that. Chances are, if you send me a Google Hangout...
Sorry, I've got to interject here. So, unfortunately, and I'm not trying to condescend to you, but people will click on your video and assume you're talking to them personally. And that's just how it is. We talked about this off air when you said about your friend who's off camera who may be listening to this thinking, bastard. But, you kind of said if he met Patricia, he'd be really excited. Now, nothing wrong with that, but I have a totally different view. I see you, John LeBon, as just a dude, just some guy. And when you do great things, I think, cool, look what one cool dude can do, but you're still just one dude. Does that make sense? In other words, we're kind of not all fantastic, despite the fact that I'll say, flat Earth brings me the inquisitive nature and all this kind of stuff. I'm still just one dude. That's what it all boils down to. But people will see a video that you've made and go, he's made that to anger me.
Yeah, this is, we're now going into the realm of mental health. There are lots of people out there with mental health problems who really will, you'll do a gesture like this to say, okay, and they'll say, oh my God, he just did the 666, this means he's wearing red, and and all kinds of stuff, which are all basically delusions. They really are delusions. There's no actual logical links between them. So yes, there is a thing called Luciferianism. Yes, there is a character called Satan. Now these are characters. There's also a character called Sauron. Personally, I'm more afraid of Sauron, who can lock you in the abyss, than Satan. Because let's face it, Satan has a big boss called God who could just snuff him out, but Sauron doesn't. Okay, so, but come on. When people look and they think that things are being addressed to them or codes are being given, it's mental health. And unfortunately, and this goes back to what you were saying, John, about what gives us the right to overwrite other people's beliefs. We don't have any right. This is part of the problem. Part of the reason people appreciate waking up to the flat Earth is understanding that this kind of coercive authority, which was trampling over knowledge, experience, with their belief system, inculcating it, forcing it on us. And now we realize that all of that was totally illegitimate. We still have people who try to coax us back onto the globe. Say, okay, yeah, I understand you want me to go back onto the globe because you are happy on the globe and you think that I'll be happy. I was happy on the globe before, I'm happy now too. Am I happier? I have different ideas about happiness, but the whole idea that that anybody has a right to force their thoughts on somebody else, or kind of relate to the world as if thoughts are something that have this intrinsic value that will basically make something manifest. Like, for instance, thinking that John Le Bon is talking directly to them, or me, or Nathan, or Patricia, or David, or anybody talking directly to them. This thought that another human being, remote, somewhere else, maybe not even at the same time, they might be watching a repeat or something after it's been on air, is talking directly to them. This is false, and this is you're engaging with that kind of thought is forcing it's like a vibration into the world where you're going to direct yourself, you're going to make videos, you're going to make comments, you're going to do all kinds of stuff with it, which is basically forceful and not nice. It's not kind. And you might see somebody who has an opposing point of view to yours as being an enemy, but they're not. An enemy is somebody who basically wants you dead. This idea that an enemy can be just somebody who has a different point of view, we have to start looking into words and the meanings of words, which is why I was going on about belief. Belief means I don't know. You can say,
I can't remember who said it in the chat. It was about half an hour ago, but it's about the suspension of disbelief, and the media have tapped into this. So I've seen this to the degree where people watch, let's pick a random soap opera, so let's say EastEnders, and they will start to empathise with the characters to such a degree that they will feel an actual hatred towards the bad guy, the Nick Cotton character. They will actually despise that person as though they are real. They're alienated from the characters. Their suspension of disbelief has been literally tapped into to the degree where they think these people are real. Now, again, there's going to be people in the audience that say, nah, surely not. But absolutely, there are people out there like that, and a lot of them, huge numbers, swathes.
Yeah, and this is I think this is a symptom of the reality we live in, where we have authority telling us what's what, which in our mind becomes this thing which is something totally external, remote, unconceivable really in the real terms of what government is. It's not a bunch of buildings, it's not a group of people, really it's just a notion, it's a belief. That this thing.
I've got a question for John, basically. This leads off something that we were talking about before we went on air. So one of John's, I can't think of another word, but I'm going to call it a belief, is that Flat Earth is a cult with leaders, and this is a kind of a hierarchical structure that we've been given, again, based on the way we've been educated, that there must be this hierarchy. I don't know if you I kind of want to, no matter how I phrase it, I'm going to put words in your mouth. So I don't know. I'm going to shut up and hopefully you'll.
No, that's okay. Let me just speak about this one. I guess broadly and from the start. There's many people watching this right now as we speak. They're not in a cult. They're not cult members. They're interested in this because they've given up heliocentrism, and now Flat Earth on YouTube is the main place to go to if you no longer believe in heliocentrism. So there's an element of interest in listening to other people who no longer believe what they used to believe. There's people who are interested in this just from, well, these guys are really talking about this. Who are these people? There are people who might be interested in it because they like the style of Nathan Oakley or they like Antonio. There are people who are watching this for all different reasons. They're not necessarily part of a cult, okay? The point that many people are making, and I am one of those people, is that a lot of the people who follow this scene, they do it and they behave in a certain way that is very cult-like. And some of the people higher up, I understand there's no central leader, some of the people who are higher up, they do act in ways that are similar to cult leaders. Things like love bombing new people who participate, things like, say, getting people to talk about how unhappy they were before they found this new truth. There are similarities. Now, does that mean that they're trying to run a cult? Of course not. And even if 60% of people involved in this, and that's just an arbitrary number for argument's sake, even if 60% were just like cult members, does that mean the other 40% should be stigmatized or should be told not to follow this scene because of the other 60%? Of course not. But the simple point that people like me are making is some people end up with this religious devotion to this scene, to this group of people, and it is cult-like. And I wouldn't even really care so much, except I've got people denying it. They're trying to deny this to me. And I'll say, okay, then, so what traits do you think a cult follower would have? And they'll name me the traits, and I'll say, okay, then so let me give you a few examples of people in Flat Earth who act that way, and they'll agree with that. But then they'll try and deny the connection between the two, and that's what I find more fascinating than anything.
Examples, John. Give us really specific.
Okay, well, again, this cult Flat Earth thing, you guys brought it up, not me. I was happy not to talk about it, but if you want to talk about it, look at some of the people who post a video saying, I'm coming out as a Flat Earther, go to their comments section and click, instead of top comments, click newest comments, scroll down to the bottom and see what you notice. You'll notice what would be called in other realms love bombing, okay? Some of the leading figures coming along and saying, so glad that you're here, this is terrific, things are going to be better for you now. These sorts of general sentiments. Now, if you just saw that on one channel, okay. You see it on 2 channels, okay. You'll see this time and time again that new members are love bombed. Now, are all the people doing the love bombing, are they thinking to themselves, aha, another member for our cult? Of course not. But most people in a cult don't realize that they're in a cult, you see. Now, that's one example. There are others, and we could go through all of the examples that I've got. But what difference does it make? I don't think you guys are cult leaders or cult members. You believe strongly that the Earth is flat. That's fine. I think a lot of your followers, if you're being honest, do act like cult followers.
Sorry, I want to get it in. Is because I think it's your belief in a hierarchy. So you said the people higher up. That was the way you phrased it.
Yeah. Sorry, John. Not to. I don't want to cut you off. Make them catch hold of your thoughts so you don't lose it. You can pick up from when I leave. So, if we said this is an ideology that has all of the same elements that you're ascribing to as a cult, but don't have anything missing, like the cult does have missing. There's no central character. There's no deity. Those are the fundamental things to a cult, and without those things, the thing is not a cult. It's an ideology. So there have been ideologies before. The Confucian ideology. In China, they've had right now they have the Falun Gong, which is an ideology, and the leader of the Falun Gong, the person who wrote the Falun Gong, the Falun Dafa, is not a leader, and he expresses this, he explains this. He just put the thing together for everybody else. He will be dead one day. Don't follow him. He's just put a series of instructions, and other people can build on those. And he is not a leader. He stipulates this. He emphasizes this. He explains how things that have leaders can be co-opted. This is an ideology, which is why it's illegal in China to be a Falun Gong practitioner. And Falun Gong is basically a combination between yoga and Tai Chi. That's all it is. But it's the mentality that goes with it, which is forbearance, temperance, patience, being kind to the world, being respectful, not challenging, not offering resistance, all of these elements. Basically, what it's doing is it's saying you don't need to fear. Okay, the Chinese government does not want the Chinese population not fearing the government. No government wants its population to not fear it. So, with the flat Earth, is it a cult or is it an ideology? And if I ask you, John, what do you think it closer resembles, a cult or an ideology?
Well, I think it's different for all people, and that's why I said at the start there are people here who are interested for different reasons. Okay. We were talking earlier in the show about how if you take a belief away from someone, there's a vacuum that's left, okay? Now, all 3 of us on this panel and most of the people in the live chat, we all agree that what we were taught about heliocentrism is nonsense, okay? This idea that we live on a ball that's spinning on its own axis once per day, okay, going around the sun at incredible speeds, astronomical speeds. Like, where does the term astronomical come from? Like, think about it, right? We're flying at astronomical speeds, and then that sun itself is going around a black hole, all this kind of stuff. Most of us now agree that that's nonsense. The problem in that's a foundational belief for us from the time that we're young. That's where we are. That's where we are, So you take that away from people, what are they left with? There's a vacuum. And again, if the first thing that they hear about to replace that is flat Earth, there's a good chance that will become their new belief. And then now they've been ostracized from the rest of society, or they feel so different to everybody else in society because, hey, most of these people still believe they live on a giant spinning ball hurtling around the sun. They still believe that, right? So they feel a great distance, like a fundamental distance from everybody else around them. But there's a group of people online who also don't believe that they live on a giant spinning ball. Most of those people believe that the Earth is flat. It's a natural human predisposition now to be more receptive to what those people say, to feel an allegiance or a collegiality with those people. And I think for a lot of people, that's what's happened. Now, this is to say nothing about whether flat Earth is true or false. It's simply to say that there are natural, what do you want to call it, psychological or sociological reasons why people who have let go of heliocentrism might be drawn towards this group of people, these hundreds or thousands of people on YouTube who talk about flat Earth. It doesn't mean that they're all in a cult. You know, you might have it as an ideology. Some of them might behave just as though they're in a cult. Many of them might be former cult members, you see. So when you say, is it more of an ideology or more of a cult, it depends on a person-by-person basis. I'm not pretending to know why each and every person in that live chat right now is here. Only they can know that. Do you see what I mean?
I can say this, okay. Within the flat Earth, I don't like to call myself a flat earther. I really don't. Because I'm not a flat earther. I'm a human being. That's what I am. And I live on the Earth. And the Earth, as far as I can tell, is flat. This is just as far as I can tell with my own personal experience. But the majority of people in the who call themselves flat earthers, or who perceive the same thing as I do regarding the shape of the realm on which we live, the reason they engage with all of this is not so much the flat earthness, it's this sense of camaraderie, like you mentioned. Not just the flat Earth, it's the vaccines, it's the fluoride, it's the history, it's the the freaking dinosaurs, a whole range of things about which the normal people out there have a position which is programmed into them that they can't question because they don't have the tools with which to question it. And we have a large group of people here who do have the tools to question it, and by having those tools, they have the tools to question their own perception and their own beliefs, in inverted commas.
Can I add something? And I have to agree with John on this particular point, which is one or a couple of words which John used, which was love bombing. Now, it's a psychopathic term, and there's a specific reason for love bombing. And just to give a very brief idea, so if you were to meet a new person, and that new person was to give you everything you wanted, they showered you with affection, very caring, gave you lots of gifts, that would be love bombing. But the follow-on to that is that the idea is that gives you a rush of chemicals, that love sensation, only to have it taken away. Now, I could argue that the people who go in and give these comments and encouraging new flat earthers, to keep it in John's context, are not having it taken away. The problem is that when someone like John, or and again we discussed this before we went on air, someone like Tiger Dan takes the same methodology to point fingers at flat Earth, they get ridiculed. It's difficult to argue against John's point. Do you follow me, John?
Yeah, I do, and that's the thing. I was happy to come here and not address the whole "is flat Earth like a cult?" I mean, that video that I made that was very controversial at the time was "is flat Earth like a cult?" with a question mark. Now, Antonio makes a good point. Even when you phrase it that way, the important terms are still there, so it's going to get people thinking in a way. Like if you wanted to make people think flat Earth is a cult, you could still just put "is flat Earth a cult?" and that could still have the same effect. The difference was that in my video, I went through like 10 different criteria that weren't even my criteria. They were the criteria that were used by a leading flat Earth proponent. So I just said, well, that flat Earth proponent has gone through the list. They've agreed that 2 elements are like flat Earth, the other 8 are not. I'll give you my take. I think 7 of the 10 I said was similar to flat Earth. That's my take. If people had have come back and gone, well, I think this and this are, but the other 8 aren't, or this and this are, but these other 6 aren't, fine. Like, what's the issue here? There's no need to get defensive. It's simply an observation. There's not really even a value judgment necessarily involved. But what followed from that wasn't people going through the list and saying, here's why I disagree. What followed was extreme defensiveness and vitriolic attacks on me. Now, those vitriolic attacks on me are only helping the case of the people who are saying that people are very defensive because this is a strong belief that they now hold. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I still see it more an ideology. In fact, I know it's not a cult because I'm in it. Um, when you think of and like I said before, you know how to use words. So when you say a leading proponent, is there leading proponents? Like you can say that Nathan, me, Patricia, Bob, David, Mark, Eric, leading proponents. That's really a misnomer, because everybody is an individual, and there'll be people who prefer Mark, there'll be people who prefer Nathan. There'll be
Yes, what
people
I
who
was trying to
prefer
get
people who
across in
prefer.
terms of the belief in the hierarchy and that structure has been educated into us.
Yes.
But that could be my belief in that.
No, 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 no. There are things that you can actually test and prove and demonstrate for yourself, and bring somebody else and have a look at the same things. The words we use mold the world. When you say leading proponent, is it a leading proponent? What if that leading proponent dies? Does what that leading proponent say become a relic of history of the flat Earth? We mentioned Tiger Dan. I thought when I saw him reworking the model that he was going about it a stupid way. I genuinely did, because if you don't know the flight speed, then you can't determine the flight distance on time. So it's just a silly move, and I watched
Tiger Dan.
unfolded, and it's like, oh, come on. But anyway, with the whole, we'll move on from the cult thing, not because it's uncomfortable. Okay, I think it's fascinating, but there was somebody that was kind of a bit prominent in the flat Earth movement, if you want to call it that, who was urging towards a cult-like system with a hierarchy, and she was shat on, not because the rest of the cult didn't want this person to be the leader, but because nobody wants this to be a cult, to function like a cult, to have a hierarchy, to have any of those elements. And you receive vitriol for some of what you say. We receive vitriol. You want to see the vitriol we get. You can't take the fact that you receive vitriol for something you say or something you show as indicative of a group of people. You can only take it as indicative of the individual giving you the vitriol. The person might be doing it for personal reasons. You might have hit a raw nerve. It's not really important, but to blanket term and say, this person is a flat earther, therefore this is how flat earthers behave. Like, no. That's equivalent to saying one nasty Jew does something, all Jews are nasty, or one white supremacist does something, all white supremacists are nasty. It's blanket terms. We have to mind our language, I think. Not police it, not have freaking political correctness, but be savvy with our language and use it in a way that is conducive to agreement in terms of how to pursue truth or what things are true or not. Not agreement as in conduct, and coerciveness. So
yeah, you can't judge a whole group just based on the actions of one or two. I completely agree with you about that. And I said to you guys after the debate, like in our after show, that I fully take responsibility for a couple of videos I made were highly inflammatory, and I made them knowing that many people would get inflamed by them, but I made them anyway. And there was a couple. We've already mentioned one of them, the child ostracism one, right? I made a video based on one. It was only Patricia Steers' interview with that young gentleman. Only two people. Okay. So even if it were the case that Patricia were in any way condoning that child distancing himself from his peers, even if that were true, it wouldn't mean that everybody else involved in this scene supports the idea of encouraging children to distance themselves from their peers, right? So I put that out there knowing that a lot of people wouldn't think about the question being asked, wouldn't think about the video being shown, they'd instantly go into attack mode. But as I said to you guys, that wasn't the idea. I wasn't releasing it just to inflame those people. I knew that would be a consequence of the question I was asking, which was, do you condone the idea of children distancing themselves from their peers because they no longer believe the same foundational beliefs? Now, a small percentage of people engaged themselves in that conversation in the chat that followed. The majority of people didn't. They instantly started defending Patricia and her show, and maybe rightly so. Maybe Patricia was completely right. That's almost tangential here to the central point of, do you, as an individual, condone this idea? Now, me personally, I don't. Even if I was 100% certain that heliocentrism was a lie, and I'm pretty much as close as you can be to being 100%, but not very, like I'm not really 100% on very many things, right? Some things are self-evident, other things are more abstract, you see. But even if I was completely convinced that heliocentrism was 100% a lie, even though I had like a 14-year-old nephew who really looked up to me, and he said, "Uncle Jono, do you think I should hang out with my mates?" I'm like, "Mate, they're your mates. You're 14 years old. You're at an age now where you're going to have a lot of fun for the next few years with your mates. That'll be the best fun that you have, is hanging out, doing things together. You're going to disagree with him about something. He's going to disagree with you about that. That guy might not be very good at footy, whatever. You're going to have things that normally you don't really like about other people, but these are your mates. Put other things to the side for now. You can worry about the more abstract stuff later, but you're 14, have fun." That's what I would personally say. Now, others will come back and say, no, if you have 5 mates who all believe completely wrong things, they shouldn't be your mates. That's fine. That's a conversation that you could have. That's a discussion you could have, especially since we've now got children with phones. They can watch this stuff if they want to. They can watch you guys. They could be 12-year-olds watching us right now, you see. So now there's almost like, and this goes to what Nathan was saying earlier about, people are going to watch your channel. Even if you say, "Oh, you don't have to watch it, you can click off," which I believe is true, these are still children who might look at this. They might not have enough sense to understand the consequences of saying to people, "I think the earth is flat." You see, so there's almost like a duty of care. So that was the conversation I was trying to get going. But of course, the majority of people weren't interested in these conversations. They instantly had an emotional reaction. Why did they have the emotional reaction? Well, I think I've got my answer is pretty obvious. What I think is why they're doing this, why they're having this emotional reaction. You guys might have a different answer. But we got onto all of this by me saying, I released those videos. I knew that some people were going to get inflamed by them. No matter if what Patricia did was right or wrong, it doesn't apply to all of you.
John, sorry to interrupt, because you said you think, I'm sure you know what is your answer? Why do you think that?
The same reason. I went on to Sean Hufford. I woke up the other day, it was Sunday morning here, and I got a live hangout invitation by this guy called Sean Hufford, who I didn't know at the time. Turns out he was the guy who moderated the Zeteticism versus Red's Rhetoric debate, right? So I get this live hangout. It was a Sunday morning. I'm like, sure, I'll go check it out, right? Turns out there's Red's Rhetoric there, and they want to have a chat. And I was free that Sunday morning, so I was like, sure. And so I started going through some simple things with them, and they started attacking me. And I was like, well, hold on, why do you believe what you believe? You know what I mean? Why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? They started telling me about Eratosthenes, and I'm like, okay, what books have you read about Eratosthenes, you see? And they started getting very defensive and very emotional. A couple of them stormed off. They're like, I can't listen to this guy anymore. This guy's a moron. This guy's an idiot, blah, blah, blah. They were the ones trying to tell me stories that they couldn't justify with evidence. They were the ones storming off, right? The same emotional reaction. Whatever you believe very strongly that you can't prove, there's a very good chance you're going to get defensive about it, especially if you're somewhat insecure about it. If there's a part of you that knows there might deep down be a few problems with it, like I think a lot of people's offensiveness comes from insecurity. Like if you look at who gets offended by certain things, oftentimes there's an insecurity that's involved there. So I think the same reactions that I get on my channel to my videos criticizing or questioning certain flat earth proponents, it's the same reason why I got that reaction from Sean Hufford and all of his heliocentric mates. It's the same thing. They believe something very strongly. There might be a touch of insecurity there about it. And so someone comes along and says, well, here's why I don't believe what you believe, and here's why I question what your behavior is. They get defensive. Now, I'm not saying that means it's just like a cult, right? You can even forget the word cult. It doesn't matter. The point is there are people who are having emotional reactions to being questioned. Now, whatever it is that they believe, whether it's heliocentrism, flat earth, whatever, if you're having a visceral, emotional reaction to someone who questions your beliefs, what the hell is going on?
Yes.
Sorry, Antonio. When I said about 6 months ago, and I was having, you've used the words much better than me, an emotional reaction to a video that wasn't made about me, that wasn't directed to me. It was just had a question mark at the end, and suddenly I found myself having an emotional reaction, and I stopped and thought, John LeBon, you clever bastard. And suddenly I got it. The penny dropped. That's what you're doing. That's the idea. But for some people, they just have the emotional response.
Okay, this is for the audience out there. Child ostracism to the side. Your 12-year-old nephew comes to you and says, "Hey, Uncle John, can you explain to me the Earth and the Sun and all of this? We're doing something at school, and I was sick and I didn't get to hear what the teacher said. Can you tell me how it works?" would you tell them the heliocentric model because that's what his peers are learning, or would you say to him something else?
That's a really good question, mate. And so I'm 28, and I've got a number of siblings, and they've got children who range from practically newborn up to about say 12 or 13. And so I live up here in Brisbane. They all still live down there in Melbourne, and so I haven't had to go through the practical experience of sitting there with a young child who I know is being indoctrinated into nonsense Monday to Friday, and having to sit there and listen to them talk about this stuff and able to question them on their beliefs. I haven't gone through that practical experience yet. And so for me, this isn't just like a hypothetical question, though. My plan is to go back to Melbourne, not just for visits, but maybe even permanently again one day. You never know. You never know what's going to happen, right? So this is something I'm going to have to go through, knowing what I think I know now about the lies of the official, like the establishment story. How do you then deal with little children who you know are being indoctrinated with this nonsense by school and by TV, etc.? Like, this is something I'm going to have to go through, even if not with my nephews and nieces. With my own children, hopefully one day I would love to have my own children. So this is a conversation that I think is really worthwhile. If people are going to send their children to school, how do you deal with that? If your family members send their children to school and get this nonsense, how do you as an individual who no longer believes that stuff, how do you deal with it? So I'm not even sitting here and pretending to know all of the answers or the solution to these problems, but I am pointing out that it is a problem. If you've got people, little human beings, and to me, 14 years old, that's a very young person. Do you know what I mean? If you've got these young people who are, on the one hand, all of their peer group are believing something because they're being taught it by their authority. You know that you're pretty confident what they're being taught is nonsense, and they're in this position of, well, they look up to you because you question what they're being told. However, Monday to Friday they're with those people. How do you deal with those young people? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even sitting here saying that what Patricia or others do is 100% definitely wrong. I don't know. I'm here to be convinced. What should we do with young children who have access to what they have access to what we're talking about right now, okay? And even if you put restricted 18 plus on this, children are smart enough to get around that, okay? So everything that we're talking about here, they're going to have exposure to. How do you and I, as individuals and as a group, how do we deal with the fact that there are little human beings who are being indoctrinated right now? Some of them might slip through the cracks and listen to us. Do we want to be responsible for them going to school on Monday and saying, I don't need you guys anymore, I don't need mates anymore at school, forget all you guys, I've got friends online now, and they're going to be my friends. How do we deal with this potential situation that could arise where young children whose natural, like they will naturally lean towards social groups at school, how do we deal with this idea that they might stop doing that because now they think that they can rely on you or on me or on us to be their friend, when we can't. We don't know them in real life. We're not there to be with them when they go through stuff at school. Their peer group is going to be there. So do you really want to tell them or in any way encourage them to forget their real peer group because they've got us online? I think these are very important ethical questions. Very important.
They really are. There was a 17-year-old, a little bit older, a 17-year-old, I forget her name, but she was one of the first internet YouTube characters. She was called Boxy, and she was a really cool character, and she was 17. The reason, and she started making lots and lots of friends because she was making videos just talking about her day and stuff and putting it on YouTube, and she started making a lot of friends who she didn't know in the real world. They were all internet friends. These people helped her through a stage in her life where she was not the most popular girl in school. She was not the sporty. You know, she was one of these who felt isolated, like so many 17-year-olds, 15, 17-year-olds feel isolated. Now, if you feel isolated because of your beliefs rather than your personality traits, it's good to have a support group online. That's one of the good things. In fact, as much as there's negative stuff to do with the electronic world and the modes that we have now for communicating, there are positives. And we've all heard about bullying and problems with bullying. There are people who are being bullied who have friends around the world who tell them how to cope with it. Now they might meet them, but these people, they know online. Now, they know them because they were also bullied, but the fact that there's a connection there and the connection offers support, the person who's being bullied doesn't have the peer group that the bully has. The bully has a peer group, but the person who's isolated already immediately doesn't have the peer group that they can turn to. So if they can turn to it online, you know, so it's not so bad.
I want to directly answer John's question though, which was what do we actually tell the children?
Oh, okay. This is what we tell the children.
Okay, you do it then.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly. We tell the children that sometimes people will say things as if they were true, which are not, because they're convinced that they are true. They don't have any bad intent in putting these things forward. They just don't know, for instance, that fluoride is good for you. That's absolutely incorrect. It is not good for you. So teachers will teach you things, and friends will tell you things that they believe are true. And the point of the teachers to tell you things, the point of school, is for you to learn the things you've been told and repeat them. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to accept them. You just have to repeat them. Later on, you can go and find out whether or not fluoride is good for you or not. You know, I can say not a couple more times in that sentence, or not. But that's it, basically. You tell the children how the world functions. Just because somebody's young doesn't mean they're stupid. They might not have developed the skills that an adult has, but it doesn't mean they're stupid. You can explain to a child how the world functions, and that's it. You know, you tell them, you know, find out, you can find things out in the rest of your life. Da Vinci died saying there's so much more to learn. Tell them that.
I'm waiting for Nathan to chime in.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know what to add. I mean, my niece asks me these sorts of questions, and I'm stood outside with her, and I tell her how the heliocentric model works, because I know full well that what John says is correct, but it's based on a societal thing. So society encourages the ostracism of children, not flat Earth. That was on the point without my blood boiling for, you know, the reasons you've installed your clickbait title or whatever. You know, that aside, I feel that it's a societal thing that literally does, as you've suggested flat earthers do, encourage the ostracism of children for having a different idea to anything other than the stringent rhetoric which they're told to repeat. Now, knowing this, having that knowledge and understanding about how the education system works, tells me that there is no alternative. You have to make the child in what is currently the peak of our existence. I mean, this is a fundamental reason why I wanted this conversation with John, was because we live in what we could consider the peak of civilization, and the peak of civilized society is lies and deceit and nonsense and bullshit. That's outrageous, but it's still the society that we live in, and it's still structured in the way that it is. And in terms of educating children, they will be, as far as I'm concerned, in my belief system, if you want to call it that, lied to when they get into their school classroom. Well, knowing this, you can either let them be ostracized because that's how the structure is established, or tell them how they will be lied to. In other words, buy into the bullshit just so that they will survive on a societal level. Nobody wants their child ostracized, and they will be. Patricia highlighted this on her show. It does happen, and this is not because they're going to a flat earth cult or finding some relief from their ostracism that society pushes on them for having a belief in flat earth or anything else. You know, you could remove the flat earth element and use a religious aspect in a predominantly white school. Suddenly a random religious, what they would consider fundamental religious belief comes into their classroom, and it will be ridiculed just by the way society is structured. That's outrageous and disgusting, but what do you do when this is, according to what we are told, the peak of our civilized society?
If you think of the people who are ostracized in times of war, the people who are ostracized are pacifists, and they don't have a peer group, but the people who stick by their ethics and they don't join the military. They have a problem right now in Israel where more people are just refusing to serve in the IDF. So being ostracized from a system that's a bit screwed is not such a bad thing. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times, and it is true, the peak of our society, the peak of civilization. If we look closely at what we are, the peak of our civilization right now is discovering that we were lied to. That's the peak. It's not living in a world full of lies. We were living in a world full of lies in the 1980s. In the 1980s, everybody believed the media. There was no big conspiracy theories, maybe Bill Cooper, but nobody was hearing these people. Now we're in a world where we're seeing how things run. And that's the peak of our civilization right now. And it's growing, you know, whether it's from the flat earth or other conspiracies. People are looking at the world and thinking, do you know what? There's something not right here. It's not been right for a long time. I've discovered this, this, and this. I'm going to look to see what else is also false. So that's the peak right now.
Another topic that John touched on, and I don't know how long we've been rolling for now, maybe a couple of hours, was some other hoaxes. And the Egyptian hoax was one that we are sold as being another peak of civilization. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit, John.
Yeah, I can talk about Egypt if you like. I guess Egypt is a classic example of I could sit here and tell the audience what I've found with my research, but it would almost be a pointless exercise. I just encourage them, if Egypt is a topic that they're interested in, if they think that there were pharaohs roaming around a couple thousand years ago and they had people, slaves or workers or whatever story you believe, build these pyramids, you know, with ropes made of vine or whatever they think they know about Egypt.
They had massive
I just
whips.
encourage them.
Massive whips.
Whatever they think Egypt was, I would just encourage them, if they're interested, just to go and look into what primary sources can you find about this story of Egypt. Go and look into images of the opening of King Tut's tomb. Ask yourself if anybody other than the authorities gave you these images, would you believe them? Like, I think the method is more important than the ultimate, like anything that I've found using the method of skeptical inquiry, that's what I've found. But I would just encourage the people to go and do that themselves. Just go and look into what you can find. And I think this is a really interesting way to spend your time. I mean, a lot of people, I think when I was about 16 or 17, I read then the study that said that the average Australian watched like 2.5 hours of TV a day. Now, things have changed since then because everything's online now, so very few people sit there, especially sort of our age, and just sit there for 2 or 3 hours and watch your television, right? But still, based on what I hear from people when I'm working or I'm out there talking to people, I still imagine that most people are watching a couple of hours of what would otherwise be called TV a day, right? So this you might call their leisure time. Well, what if you just spend some of your leisure time just investigating the history that you've been given on television? To me, I think it's an interesting thing to do. It's a fascinating thing to do. And what's more, I'm happy to say right now that if you spend the time doing that, you'll find yourself no longer believing in a whole bunch of stories that you used to think were true. But like Nathan, to answer your question, like what do I think about Egypt? Well, I don't believe that thousands of years ago dudes built the pyramid or built the Sphinx. I just don't believe that stuff anymore. But the only reason I don't believe it is because I've gone and looked for their evidence that it's true. You get where I'm coming from?
I had a question in my 20s. I read the Bible and decided, you know, if I want to have any kind of thing to say about religion or at least Christianity or Judaism, I'm going to read the Bible. And I did. And it wasn't until years later that somebody pointed out that there's no mention in the Bible of the pyramids. Now, when I was reading the Bible, I didn't think, hey, hold on, why aren't the pyramids mentioned here? I didn't. I was reading the stories and the events and whatnot. There's no mention of the pyramids in the Bible, and it's based, all of it, in that area. So how can that happen? Is it that they were so accustomed to the pyramids that they thought, don't bother mentioning it, you know, or what? There's no mention. There's no mention. In fact, there's no mention of aqueducts, you know. And
well, I'm glad you're bringing the Bible, Antonio, because this was something I was hoping we would talk about, because I spoke about this with Russian on my show like a week ago. Now, this is an area that I've been looking into for months and months and months, right? But it came up with Russian Vids because he seems to do a lot of interesting work on certain topics, but he still seems to believe that the Bible is true and it's 2,000 years old, right? And I thought, well, this would be a good opportunity to speak with someone who's been in this scene for a lot longer than me. Okay, he's more knowledgeable on certain topics than me. He has far more subscribers and views than I do. So this will be a great chance to speak to someone who is in this scene well above me, see what his evidence is. Is he actually being skeptical of the Bible as he is of everything else? And so we went through a couple of things, right? Like, say, the Codex Sinaiticus. Okay, if people look up the Codex Sinaiticus, the Book of Sinai, this is one of the most important texts that we have, one of the most important versions of the Bible that we have. And it's meant to be thousands of years old, but it was discovered, rediscovered, in a monastery in Sinai near Egypt or something, like 150 years ago, right? But not only that, it was discovered by this guy who was sent there by the Tsar, and he found these monks who had these 2,000-year-old books, burning them for warmth. And he's like, stop burning those books, bro. There's Bibles in there. Look what I just found, a 2,000-year-old Bible, right? He brings it back to Russia. Of course, the Tsars get deposed, and then Stalin's in charge. Stalin's running out of money, so he sells, this is in the 1930s, so he sells this 2,000-year-old Bible to London, sells it to England. He needs money, so they're like, we'll give you money for the Bible. That's why it's now in a library or in a museum in London to this day. This 2,000-year-old Bible that was discovered 150 years ago being burnt, or in a monastery where they were burning ancient texts, right? Now, when I discovered this story, I was like, well, that's very suspicious. Call me old-fashioned, but that seems like a little bit of a suspicious story. Do I really believe this story of a 2,000-year-old book in a monastery where they're just burning old books? Do I really believe that? Probably not. But that's not the only story of the Bible. So you look at other stories. So they've got the Codex Vatinicus. Oh, the Codex Vatinicus. Turns out there was this guy called Tischendorf. He was the one. Okay, well, just look up Tischendorf. Tischendorf. Again, I don't want to go too far into what I've found, but if people start looking at these stories, if people start looking at
do go into it, because it's freaking fascinating, and it's giving lots of people tools to pick up and run with later.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, if I sit here and say, oh, this Tischendorf guy got to see one of those books before he inspected the other, like, it makes more, people will get more from it if they just go through this process themselves of just look up the official story of the Bible, the oldest versions that we have, where did they come? Maybe, because what I do is I take notes, right? I write things down. Just write some of the key names down about one story. Then when you read the next story, see if the same names pop up. You might be interested to see that they do, right? So we've got these old books, 150 years old, from the Vatican or from the Mount Sinai. They're thousands of years old, but they were rediscovered 150 years ago, right? No problems. You ask people, why do you believe in the Bible? People like Russian vids, they'll say the Dead Sea Scrolls. You're like, oh, really, the Dead Sea Scrolls? I'm glad you brought that up. What do you know about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Here's a couple of dot points that I prepared for this show, right? Yeah. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found by shepherds in a cave in 1946 and 1947. Oh, really? Oh, interesting. That was in the West Bank, okay. They were put for sale in the Wall Street Journal in 1954. How about that? 2,000 years old history to the highest bidder in the Wall Street Journal in 1954. They're now almost all owned by Israel. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. These are the Dead Sea Scrolls. According to the Oxford Companion to Archaeology, it is a far older cross-section than available to scholars before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh, okay, so this thing is it's an older cross-section of the text of the Bible than what was available before the 1940s and 50s. Oh, that's very interesting. Now, who's using special fangle-dangle technology to uncover what's written on these Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, it's NASA. Oh, what do you know about that? So now NASA are the ones who are using special technology to uncover what's written on these ancient manuscripts were discovered by a shepherd in a cave in the 1940s. Well, how about that? Now, you're going to have to forgive me if I don't necessarily believe that this face value story is true. Okay, it might be. That story might all be true, that for 2,000 years these Dead Sea Scrolls lay just waiting for someone to uncover them, like in a movie, and that when they discovered them, they offered them for sale on the Wall Street Journal, and that NASA now, this $20 billion a year organization, can use special technology. That could all be true. Could all be true. Okay, I don't know. If you believe it's true, that's fine. Whatever, I don't care. But I don't believe it's true. You see? And then what gets me is that there are people, they talk about NASA relentlessly, about how you can't trust NASA, and they talk relentlessly about how you can't trust academia or history. But these people still push the Bible, and they'll even use the Bible to justify things like flat Earth. And so to me, there's lots of contradictions here. I see, and this is no disrespect to Russian Vids, who isn't here to defend himself, or to old mate Rob Skiba, who was on the show yesterday. They're not here to defend themselves. I'm not attacking them directly, but I am saying to those of you out there listening to all of this, thinking for yourself, why is it that people can know so much about what they've been lied to, and yet they'll try and tell you the Bible is 2,000 years old? What's going on there?
I don't know, but I know for sure that Joseph Smith found the Book of Mormon. Do you know about the Book of Mormon?
Only from what I saw on South Park when I was about 15.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true, because there were some signatures that proved that it was true. And God told him where to dig for them. God himself, not a burning bush, not a voice. God, in person.
The last Melchizedek in chat says that the Book of Enoch was amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay. Must be true if Melchizedek says it. Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh.
But can you guys see where I'm going with this? It's like, how can people sit there and try and tell other people that they've got these truths that these other people should subscribe to, while at the same time pushing stories that if anyone else, okay, think about this. If anybody else tried to tell you that they had something that was 2,000 years old, the book of the Bible, that they stumbled upon, or someone they knew stumbled upon a shepherd in the 1940s, I reckon most people would say, well, maybe this guy's telling the truth, but I'm going to need some more evidence. I'm going to look into that myself a little bit further, right? But for some reason with the Bible, they don't seem to want to do that. And I do wonder why that is. I wonder what's going on.
Eric Dubay, sorry, Antonio. Eric Dubay uses this as a justification against dinosaurs. So he says that you've got, is it paleontologists? Is that the right terminology? Yeah. Paleontologists digging for the bones and shock horror they find them, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls were stumbled upon, etc., etc., etc. In other words, discoveries are accidental, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, unlike dinosaur bones, which are found by the very people that should be looking for them and finding them. What a coincidence.
Yeah. If I can just go back to the Bible, my biggest question mark with the Bible, not so much the Genesis, I see lots of it as just being people interpreting what was written before them or what was believed to be the case. The Book of Job, who was that written by? Who knew that Lucifer went in for an audience with God? Was it this story that's in the Bible, which is supposed to be such an apocryphal tale? If you sit to question any of it, you see that this is just really there just to prop up the church, because the thing that Job does is he continuously makes an offering, and the offering is done to the rabbi or the priest. So I urge every single person out there, if you're not going to read anything other in the Bible, read the Book of Job, and that's it. That's my big question with the Bible.
Like, I think one of the reasons why I think the Bible is a really important one is because some of the people who are prominent in this scene, many of your audience members would look up to people who do use the Bible as one of their sources for their belief about things like the shape of the earth, right? Now, it could be a good source and it could be making a good case, but why would you just trust it on face value if you hadn't spent some time looking into the backstory? And if you were to look into the backstory and find that much of it was just found in the last 60, 70 years ago, or 150 years ago, or 200 years ago, if you were to discover that, would you still want to believe the Bible was 2,000 years old because it helped other beliefs that you had? I think in a lot of cases that would be the case. I think for a lot of people, they'll scrutinize evidence if it's for the other side, but if they think it helps their side, not so much scrutiny. And to me, that's basically a hypocritical position to have. And so if someone says to me, no, I don't use the Bible as a source of evidence for, say, belief in the shape of the earth, cool, no problems. My problem is with people like the Russian vids or the Rob Stevens other characters who will say, on the one hand, well, you can't trust what that person's saying, you can't trust what that person's saying, but this book happens to say the earth is flat. And it's like, okay, well, maybe it does, and maybe the Bible's legitimate. Let's talk about that. Let's have a discussion about that. So I'm trying to encourage more people to have open discussions about this. And like I see in the live chat there, like there's 170 people there, and a lot of them do seem, even though I think I've been pretty well behaved today, they do seem very angry at me, and they're saying all kinds of really nasty things. I mean, take a step back and look at some of the stuff that's been written. These are people who think that they've found the truth and they've found purpose and meaning and they've found love and peace. And look at what they're saying about me just because I'm asking questions, right? It's pretty incredible when you think about it. The point I would make to them is, let's say that the earth is flat, right? Let's say I'm wrong, the earth is flat, and this is a key truth that's going to unlock, like it's going to help society regain some sense, right? Let's just say that's all true. You're better off having answers to these questions now while it's still small and it's still on YouTube before it gets big. Okay, if you think this is going to get big, you want to sort out your answers to these questions now, not then. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, if I'm wrong about all of this, then find out why my questions are wrong, disprove me, and that way when you get on to bigger fish later, hey, you've got your defenses are ready to go. You see what I'm saying? Like, why treat people like me as a bad thing? What do you gain from that?
John, let me just let you know this, okay? If we were a cult, then I wouldn't get attacked like I do by other flat earthers, neither would Nathan. There's this thing going on where there are people who call themselves flat earthers or who will say that they believe that the earth is flat, who behave really pretty badly towards other flat earthers. So what you're not receiving so much because you're not a flat earther. You're just receiving it because some people just, that's just how they are. And, good luck to them. This is really true. There are videos made about Nathan and me by flat earthers. Or you want to see some of the abuse that Patricia gets and David Weiss and Bob, Jeremy, and the amount of so-called flat earthers out there attacking other flat earthers is ridiculous. So if this was a cult, it's the most shambolic cult ever. Because there's
I'm not even talking like on the macro scale. I just mean on the micro scale. If you're someone, whatever your truth is, if you think you've stumbled on a truth that gives you purpose, gives you meaning, that makes the whole world a much better place, then surely the first thing you do is behave in accordance with that and stop treating other people, even if they disagree with you, as though they're the enemy. Surely the enemies are the ones who are indoctrinating the children right now. Like, if there are enemies, it's the people who want the lies to be spread, rather than the people who are doing their best to question them. Like that Cavendish experiment. I'm very proud of the work that I did to help bring exposure to that for more people to see. Now, if people see the official story of Cavendish and they actually believe that a dude 200 years ago was able to determine the mass of the Earth, okay, fine. I don't need to try and change their minds. I've shown them the official story that they didn't know. They still believe the official story? No problem. A lot of people now know the official story and they no longer believe it. So I'm very proud of that, right? There are people who want you to believe that they know the mass of Mars, for Christ's sakes, and if you trace that story back, you get to Cavendish. So I helped expose that. And so this idea of trying to stop the indoctrinators and try and undercut their story, well, I've done that, and with the greatest respect to many of the listeners, I'm the one with the YouTube channel with dozens and dozens of videos about these topics, trying to undercut the lies. So if there is a group of people who are misleading others, and they've got the podium, they've got the platform, they've got the schools, they've got the televisions, and they're telling nonsense stories, like, surely they're the ones where the opprobrium should be directed, if anywhere, rather than to me. If they're directing the opprobrium to me, then they see me as a threat to them. And what am I a threat to? Well, obviously, to a belief system. You see what I mean? Like, they're treating me as a threat. But what am I a threat to? If they've got the truth, I'm no threat at all. You see?
This is what I've been trying to get to with the terminology, with the word belief. Forget belief. Just work on reason and work on knowledge. Experience, if there are people out there who believe the world is flat. If you believe the world is flat, you might be wrong. There are people out there who know the world is flat. That's different. You can't know something that's wrong. Like, genuinely, you cannot know something that is wrong. You can be led to believe that something is knowledge, but you can't know something that's wrong. That's just how the world is. So lack of curvature, various different things. So, but forget the flat Earth. In terms of beliefs, people believe historical stories that have been told. All kinds of. The Titanic. That's a really freaking cool one because it's right there. Submarines went down to look at the wreckage. Submarines saw that the word Titanic had fallen off. The two letters in the center had fallen off because they were freaking riveted on rather than edged into the metal. And underneath there was an M and a P because the ship that went down was the Olympic, which had been, was a merchant ship. It had crashed God knows how many times, into reefs and whatnot because it was so unwieldy. And this thing was freaking just, sent down to the bottom of the ocean. Now, if you look into this story, you'll find out that there were big inquiries into this, and all of it is public. Now, you can think, yeah, all of it could be planted. It's like, yeah, you can look at a conspiracy, and then if you want to be a little bit more delusional, look into a conspiracy of a conspiracy. But if you look at freaking records and you look at real things, you'll find that there was a guy nearby on a ship with 2,000 blankets just waiting, the captain, and in the inquest, the captain blamed himself for having arrived late because he went the wrong way. There were some fishermen sending off flares. He thought that was this, the predetermined signal was going to be flares, and he went that way. He arrived late, and all these people drowned. But what's he doing loitering around in the ocean with 2,000 blankets or 4,000 blankets? Something ridiculous. There are real things out there that can be discovered, that can genuinely be discovered, like wreckages at the bottom of the sea. Now, nobody's gone and planted this. This is something real. Just like the World Trade Center really did fall down. Was it planes? Was it, directed energy weapons? The truth is, those buildings came down. And there are things we can look at the world where we have history telling us one thing and the real world telling us something else. So I urge people to go and find what the something else is and not believe the stories that are being told.
But just going back to the point that you both made, sorry, John, was about the direction of one's hatred. And ironically, this was something that you're echoing, Bob, or Xanadude60 from Globebusters, and he said pretty much exactly the same thing in the chat about half an hour ago, which was that our attention should be directed towards the people who give us these preposterous and ridiculous and enormous lies. And it's not some dude, it's the powers that should not be. These are the people that should, have our full attention, not each other. So when you see the Flat Earth Vancouvers of the world telling people to send them dirt on Patricia, it's like, why are you wasting your time? What are you doing?
Yeah. Can I say on that? Like, I don't know this Flat Earth Vancouver character, but when I had a debate with a guy called Jeff C, right? There's a guy called Jeff C. I call him Jeffrey, and he actually did run, whether he was meaning to or not, an online cult that was based around busting hoaxes, Sandy Hook, Boston bombings, etc. Right? Now, some of us got sucked in. I got sucked into that one. Not nearly as bad as others, but enough so that when I pulled away from it, I thought to myself, well, I think I'm a smart guy, but I found myself, rather than calling him out on some of his nonsense, I thought, well, at the end of the day, he's doing good work overall, so I'm not going to criticize his bad work, right? It's too important. There's too much good work here. We need the world to know that Boston and Sandy Hook were fake. So instead of trying to pull him into line, I was like, well, he's the top dog at the moment. So when he says that there's too much purple on the newscast, that's some, there were things that he said and got away with that a lot of people just didn't call him out on because he was the main hoaxbuster, right? And then people started saying this is a bit like a cult, and most people wouldn't hear of it. Like, what do you mean it's a cult? We're a bunch of truthers. We're spreading the truth about Boston bombings, right? Well, I'm not sure how many of your viewers know the whole Jeffrey C, Red Pill Revolution, We'll Do It Live, PK. Some of them do, some of them don't, right?
Can you hear it?
But here's what happened.
I know a little bit about these guys, but I'd love to hear it because it predates. I'd love to hear it.
Well, here's what happened ultimately, right? Like, I mean, the long story short is a whole bunch of people online were talking about Boston bombing, Sandy Hook, what have you. A few of them were either better at it or more energetic than others. They were getting more attention. A few of them got together, started a weekly show called We'll Do It Live, right? This is when Google Hangouts, like that, those are the first Google Hangouts I was familiar with. I didn't know about the technology prior to that scene, right? So, and this is still a pretty amazing technology that we can just sit here with no latency and talk to each other around the world, and people can watch live and chat live. It's incredible, and it's still pretty young, right? So these are the first people that I know of who were doing that to talk about how we're being lied to by the TV. And anyway, long story short, there ended up being a lot of issues with some of the main characters involved. There were falling outs, what have you. By the end of it, there was one guy even performing live on air, like born-again rituals, right? So when people were saying, hold on, this is a bit cult-like, yada yada, at first people wouldn't hear of it. People got into fights. Is it a bit like a cult? Is it not like a cult? By the end, the whole thing fell completely apart, and there were on-air rituals being performed, right? Like, and then even when that was happening, there were still people denying that it was like a cult. Do you know what I mean? Some people, they'll deny it to the bitter end, and that whole scene fell apart. And anyway, the reason why I bring this truth cult up, this hoax busting cult up, is that some people have seen things before and they've learnt from them. But then there are characters involved in this flat Earth scene who were in the hoax busting scene, and they were doing the exact same thing there that they're doing now. Going around in live Google Hangouts, backgrounding against people, playing good cop, bad cop, trying to get two people in the same Google Hangout to cause dramas, getting involved in political
name
games.
and shame. Who are you talking about specifically?
Would you say you're referring to Bob from Globebusters?
No. I don't know what Bob does behind the scenes. The point I'm making is that there's a number of similarities with what people are doing now to what was happening a couple of years ago, right? Whether people they realise it or not. Now, somebody like Bob, he's in the live chat. He's trying to say that I'm a Robert Sunginis fan, that I'm supporting Robert Sunginis. Now, Sunginis claims that NASA have sent rockets up into space. Okay, Sunginis is a geocentrist, but he claims that pretty much like everything that you know right now is still true, except that the Earth is the center rather than the sun or a black hole, right? So I've come out many times saying I don't believe any of what NASA does. I don't believe in space at all. And yet Bob in the live chat will try and tell all of your fellow, like all of his listeners, oh, JLB, he's a Robert Sunginis fan. There's no evidence for that, and all the evidence contradicts what he's saying. Now, does he know that he's misrepresenting my position, or is he that defensive of Flat Earth that he'll just take anything he can use against me to convince the other listeners and then try and use it against me? Do you see what I mean? A lot of people aren't acting anywhere near as rationally as they believe or as they would have you believe. So whether it's Flat Earth, Vancouver, BC, or whether it's people like Bob, look at what they're saying, look if it's backed by evidence. If it's not, why are they saying it? Now, the reason why I brought up Jeff C was I had a debate with him in like January or February of this year in the after show. This was just after Tim Osman, Ed Upside Down Head, and Adam Moyer had their show exposing what they thought was information that proved that certain people in this scene are nefarious characters. Adam Moyer came onto the show with me on the after show. You can see it on my channel, JLB Jeffrey Debate After Show. And you know what he did? He explained how he fully got into Flat Earth. He was like, John, your Baller Skeptic Roundtable, I really believed in it. I thought you were a Flat Earther. I thought this was going somewhere. I mean, the whole Flat Earth thing was different 12 months ago, right? But then, and I recommend people go and listen to this. I'll cut out a clip and upload it to my channel. Adam started talking about how he's like, John, I was like, man, why are you doing this? Why are you acting out against the Flat Earthers? If you've realized that they're wrong, like, why don't you just move on with your life? There's no need to, like, attack the leading Flat Earthers personally, like with personal information, you know what I mean? You can focus on where you think they're factually wrong, but why go after them? And what he explained to me was basically, well, I bought into all of this, you know what I mean? And he's like, John, they take so much away from you. It's like they take everything you knew that was away from you, and all you're left with is them. And then you realize they're deceiving you, when you realize they're deceiving others, and you might not think that there's any deceivers in this. You might not think that. But a lot of people, they do. They see this scene as being led by deceivers, intentional or unintentional. Do you know what I mean? And that's why they act the way that they do. I'm not trying to defend what they do, but I'm trying to say if you try and think why they're doing it, there's a reason why they're doing it.
Oh, yes, I get it. I do think that there are people out there who think that everybody's been hoodwinked into thinking that the world is flat. It's obviously a spinning ball, and then there's people, it's obviously a static ball. But there's still people out there hoodwinking the world into being flat. What's actually going on, totally honestly, is people are trying to find out how things really are. That's it. We're trying to find out how are things in reality. Why are things certain ways? How are things that are way too far away visible? I'm not going to go into a big flat earth thing, but this is what people are really trying to find out. How do the stars move? How does the sun move? What are the extremities of the continents? How are things laid out? I've spent so much time looking at maps and seeing that there's not a freaking correct map out there. And if there is one between thousands, and there's no way for you to determine which one it is. And it's like, hold on a second, how the hell are we living in a situation where we don't know the layout of freaking continents, of countries, not political borders, just freaking coastlines? Just look at Norway. Look at Norway, you've got the fjords, yeah, fair enough, they're very complicated. Look at the area next to Murmansk, the rest of freaking Russia. What the hell's going on there? How come it's so very different between the maps? And we're not talking types of projection, we're talking freaking landmass shapes. What's going on? So this is what the flat earthers There are genuine bona fide flat earthers who are looking with a synthetic orientation to problem solving and science, are looking at it saying, what the hell is wrong with this? How can we find out what really is the case? And there are people out there who say, oh no, these people who are really trying to find out how things are, all they're doing is they're trying to build a cult, so they're trying to build a following, they're trying to make money, they're trying to all kinds of stuff. It's like, no, it's people who are actually trying to determine how things are, like in reality. And so, for instance, Globebusters, Bob, he wants to know why you have a problem with him. You know, you did the cult thing. He did a response to the cult thing, and it just seems like there's been like a problem ever since. He's a good guy. Like, Bob genuinely is a good guy, and I've told Bob that you're a good guy too. You know, but there seems to be this little level of animosity. I would just wish that the two of you would just hug it out. You know, I do. I wish you'd just.
My view on Bobby is, because I don't know him, I haven't met him, and I haven't spoken to him offline like you have, right? But from what I've seen, he seems like a genuine character. He seems to genuinely believe what he's saying. He seems to love his family. He seems like a very loving father and probably a very good person, right? I don't know him. I don't personally think he has nefarious intentions in this scene. There are one or two people I think they know what they're doing, right? But then there are others who I think, no, they genuinely believe what they're saying, and they're trying their best, okay?
So
I think Bobby's probably one of the ones.
Tell us, who do you think you know what they're doing? It's kind of nefarious. Like, really, tell us. You know, there's no reason to not tell. If I freaking knew, I'll say there's freaking Andrea Sensi in Flat Earth Vancouver. And there's a couple of characters out there that are freaking twisted. You know, David Quintana. Just the guy's brains are just scrambled. But if there are people, freaking name them. You know, especially if they're characters. Name them. You know, you'll get a freaking lot of hits from naming them because they come to your channel, they'll make videos. You know, so why not if you want some fun?
Yeah, you could. Like, there are benefits to be had from getting involved in like the actual personal name calling. The thing is, even the people who I think are nefarious, I can't prove it to you, and I think there's a certain ethical standard that like we should probably try and hold ourselves to. Where there are some people out there who are convinced that I'm nefarious. Okay, maybe not so much now. But 12 months ago, Jeffrey had a whole lot of people believing that I was a CIA agent, right? There were people, some involved in this scene today, who were in private Google Plus pages whose job was to spy on me and my actions online. This is all documented now. Once their cult fell apart, people came out and admitted, yeah, well, we were assigned to do this and our job was to do that, and it was very full on, right? And they had a lot of people convinced that I was a CIA agent, okay?
No
now,
way.
in their mind,
so, this is outrageous. I didn't know any of this.
Yes.
Seriously.
There was a guy. I'm going to get straight back to you, John. There's a guy called Andrea Sensi who set up a forum for other flat earthers to come and make negative comments on videos by Nathan, me, Patricia, Bob, Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, Mark Sargent, any of the top brass, who they said was top brass. And I've said a million times, and everybody said, there isn't top brass. There are people who produce more stuff and people who produce less. But in terms of top brass, there really, sincerely, isn't any. Like, really, people know each other. But that's not freaking top brass. That's just people knowing each other. I know you, John, and you, by being associated with me, by the fact that I've just said that I know you, you could get shit. You know, say, he's freaking top brass. He's trying to help them to, come to a more coherent, cohesive argument. People can say that, But there are people out there who have concerted freaking movements to smear, to bring down, to do whatever they can.
Because, like I said, this is news to me. The depth of what you've just said in that one little sentence, John, kind of blows my mind. So, I mean, if you can give us a bit more detail about that, because I had no idea.
Okay, well, so I'm talking about, let's just call it the hoax. Okay, I try not to call it hoax busting because there's a guy who has a show called Hoax Busters Call, and it's an interesting show. I recommend people check it out. And he is a hoax buster, and he was around before these guys. But for the sake of argument, let's just call them the hoax busting truth community, okay? And I explained earlier it gravitated around a couple of people. Again, there was no one leader, but there was a few people who were very influential, and a number of them worked together on a show, right, called We'll Do It Live, and then there were other shows as well, this kind of thing. Really long story short, there was one character in particular who wanted everyone else to believe that they were under constant attack from paid shills, you see. Because if you can create an in-out mentality, an us-first-them mentality, this is central to gaining control of people's minds, right? Make them convinced that they need you because they're under threat from other people. And I think it was an intentional thing that he did. He might have actually believed what he was doing. I don't know. The point is, they had a private Google Plus page called The Watchers, right? Now, this, I didn't know that at the time, but I was able to infer from other people's behaviors that there was something weird going on. Once all of that fell apart, enough people had fallen out with the leaders, that they started dishing the dirt, and everything became public, it actually did come out that a number of people were in this group called The Watchers, and their job from the leader of this online cult, and remember, the basis of their online cult was Boston bombings being fake, Sandy Hook being fake. So those things were fake. So it was an online cult, both, I believe that they were fake. It was an online cult based around a central truth, okay? That's the best way to go about these things, you would think, if that's what you wanted to do. So it all came out that there were people involved in this online private group. They had jobs of watching and spying on the characters who were deemed to be paid shills to report back to the leader. This is all going on behind the scenes. Certain people going around starting private Google Hangouts. Their job was to sit and listen. Their job was to try and organize Google. Like, this was all done behind the scenes. And because of Google Hangout and Skype now, this can be done, and it has been done. So we had an impromptu chat number 4, maybe, I don't know, June last year. I'm not sure when it was, when we had myself, Patricia Steer, David Weiss, and there was 4 of us. Me, Matrix Decode, Patricia Steer and David Weiss had an impromptu chat, a live show. That was the first time that I'd spoken to Patricia, and I explained to her at the time, and back then it was more okay to question Flat Earth than it is now, okay? If you go back 12 months, it was more okay to question things back then than it is now for some reason. I said to her, one of the reasons why I question some of these claims that are being made is because I've personally seen how online cults can form, how people can take a truth, sell it to people as being the truth that they're going to spread to the world, and next thing people start acting very irrationally. I've seen it firsthand. I was actually, to an extent, a victim of it myself. You know what I mean? So I've seen it. And I think if more people took the time just to take a step back and ask themselves how much of their behavior is based on the truth and how much is based on them wanting to see the truth get bigger, they might admit that they fell into the same trap that I fell into with that. Because Jeffrey, a lot of what he said was good stuff. He was breaking down Boston, Sandy Hook, whatever. But he'd also say some weird stuff, like, all of the purple on a newscast, all of that was a direct attempt to program people in a certain way. And it's like, well, I don't believe that, but I'm not going to call him out on that because overall, he's one of the bigger names in a movement that I want to see get bigger. I really believed in that truth movement at the time. You see, I believed in it. I was very new to all of this. So I look at my behavior then and I think, well, maybe some people are doing the same things now. Some of the bigger names in this scene are saying things that are utterly ridiculous, but they're not going to call them out on it even when they don't believe it because, hey, this is a movement they want to get bigger. So a lot of people think that I'm here just to chastise or criticize them. Well, no, I'm criticizing myself here. There was more that I could have done back during that whole hoax-busting truth community to help people see, hold on, some of what they're saying is nonsense, but instead, to some extent, I fell into a line. And a lot of people, they've never been seen again since that whole thing fell apart. Like that online truth cult, people were making websites and having these live hangouts, and people really thought it was getting big. Some of the people, since that whole thing fell apart, they've never been seen again online. Like that's it. They were genuine truth seekers. This was their new life. Not anymore, And
so John, yeah. I wish I'd kind of been keeping up with what was going on then. So you said that there are people now saying things that are kind of patently absurd. Do you mean people now in the flat Earth who are saying things that are patently absurd? I know I said.
Yeah, I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
Saying that this thing has millions of believers, right? That's patently absurd. Okay. Now people will say, "Oh, why are you so nasty to Bob?" Well, when they say, "Why am I nasty to him?" What have I done that was nasty? Go back to the first video. It was me cutting out a clip where he said to Max Igan on that show, "Come on, Max, this is getting bigger. We've got millions now." And he said it several times too. I only played the clip of him saying it once. He said it several times in that show. Millions. Now, a lot of people, humans naturally want to be part of things that are big and getting bigger. That's a natural thing for some reason. Not all humans, but a lot of humans. That's. If you want to convince people to your way of thinking, a good way to do it is to show them how many other people you've already convinced. You see, it's like a confidence trick. right?
Yeah.
So you keep telling people this is big, it's getting bigger, etc. That's going to have an effect on the most vulnerable minds. So Bob says, oh, we got millions. I cut out a clip, and all I do is I say, do you believe this? So you, the audience, whoever you are watching this video right now, let me show you a clip of what this gentleman said. Here's a clip of him saying it. Do you believe this? Now, the honest, sensible thing to do is to say, no, there's no evidence for that. And, Bob's a great guy. I love him. He's right about all these things. But
He
on this
did
particular issue,
retract that, though, to be fair.
but the point I'm making is when people start being nasty to him, all I did was pull him up on something that I think is patently absurd. You see? Now, it shouldn't have been up to me to pull him out because I'm the one who says that this is a movement that's going to get big. It should be the duty of people who think that this is the truth and it's a movement that's going to get big. It should be the duty of them or of you to call each other out when you say things that are patently absurd.
You've prompted one of those thoughts that I love. If you go to any Catholic person, any devoutly, studious Catholic person, and you tell them about the pre-existing avatars of a man crucified who came back to life, who was born from a virgin, all of these stories, whose father was God, Zeus was father of many half humans, When you go to them, there's a term, I've forgotten what the term is, but it's something that the church, the ecumenical church, put together. It's an argument that says, look, this is what happened, okay? The devil knew that Jesus was going to come, be born of a virgin, be sacrificed, and these things. So what the devil did was he preempted that by creating these other historical characters who were not the offspring of Yahweh, the great Lord. They were the offspring of other things, okay? In order for us now to be confused, okay? Are you aware of this argument that the church has? John?
I'm sorry, man. Like my audio cut out. I missed half of that. I'm really sorry.
So the church has an argument for when people... You've seen Zeitgeist, I take it.
Like 2007, I think, the film with the 3 parts. Yeah.
Yes. So in it he says, look, there are pre-existing avatars born from God, who were sired by God, born of a virgin, died on the 25th, were crucified, all of these things that predated Jesus or Christianity, okay? And what the church says is the devil did that. The devil went back in history. I mean, the devil knew what was going to happen in the future and preempted it by creating characters so that at the time after Jesus, people would look back and say, oh no, this happened before. It's an argument that they have, and they have a term for it. Are you familiar with this religious argument, which is the devil preempted this by creating in other cultures? Right. Well, this.
No, I'm not really. To be honest, I'm not really that well au fait with a lot of what religion teaches. To be honest.
Right. Yeah. So this is something that they have. It's a way of preempting. It's a way of responding to people who question the whole crucifixion, the dates, the story. Okay. Including the whole, blood and flesh and, bread and wine and Bacchus or Dionysus. Now, the reason I bring this up is, could it not be the case that the CIA or that organizations see the flat earth coming, they set up a truth movement around the Boston bombing and Sandy Hook to pull in the minds that would be formidable if they were not convinced that the oncoming flat earth could be manipulated or be used as a cult? So minds like you to make you think, oh, I've experienced this before. When I was with the Sandy Hook and that was co-opted. And now you look at the flat earth and you say, I see elements of co-opting, when really what you're seeing is errors of judgment, things said. And you're seeing your history, actual bona fide tactics back in the Sandy Hook days, and you're looking at them in the flat earth and you're seeing them when really the whole purpose for it in the Sandy Hook was to capture minds like yours.
Well, anything's definitely possible. And so is it possible that characters like Jeffrey were put there by another organization or what have you? It's definitely possible. When I talk about the similarities that I see between the behaviors of that online cult and then this flat earth scene that we're in, I'm just talking about similarities in behavior, and they're not unique just to online groups either. Like at the moment, I'm reading. I mean, you guys, I hear you a lot, Antonio, talk about cognitive dissonance, right? And so you'd probably know that goes back to Leon Festinger. And Leon Festinger wrote this book, When Prophecy Fails, which was allegedly a study that they carried out into a doomsday cult, like a UFO doomsday cult, back in like I think it was the 1950s, right? And so it's a book that details the infiltration of that cult to see how people behave when there are what they call disconfirmations, when their leader makes a prediction that doesn't come true, how do the members react, etc. And I almost finished that book, and then when I finished that, then I'm going to read the one that Festinger wrote a few years after that, called Cognitive Dissonance, right? And so these are the kinds of studies that he allegedly performed or took part in to help come up with this theory of cognitive dissonance. Now, the story itself that's in When Prophecy Fails, I'm very skeptical of the story. It seems very hard to believe. But some of what they talk about in that book does seem very easy to believe because I've seen it. Like one of the ideas is that if people buy into an idea, a unique idea, a world-changing idea, then when there is a disconfirmation, there's going to be a cognitive dissonance in their mind between what they believe should happen and what actually happened. And so they start proselytizing, they start trying to convince other people more strongly to try and get rid of that dissonance, right? So if they've got two things in their brain, the worldview and then the evidence that doesn't fit, and they've got that discordance, they actually make this one stronger to get rid of it, if you can imagine it that way. Now that, whether Festinger's story is true or false, whether the hoax-busting truth Jeffrey scene was intentionally put there or just happened organically, whether this flat earth thing happened intentionally or happened organically, it's not really too important when it comes to determining are some of the behaviors similar, and I think many of them are. Does that make sense?
Yes. There are studies, psychological studies, I can't name them, I don't have the details to hand, but there are studies, the research that was done that became cognitive behavioral therapy was based on the studies on cognitive dissonance. You have the post-traumatic stress disorder, where there will be triggers that have been so keyed into a personality that those triggers will follow a set of neural pathways that basically it's always the same response. And the cognitive dissonance in that case is how to have the same trigger but not have that response. So there's cognitive dissonance there where somebody says, look, it's safe, there's no helicopter shooting at us, okay, for instance. The reality doesn't mesh with their experience that they're having internally. Their experience is they're just about to be under assault. They're in Midtown New York, or, well, not New York, oops, somewhere really peaceful, okay? And something triggers the idea that they're just about to be under assault because the situation, the elements are similar to when they were under assault in a previous time. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a way of understanding how an idea that doesn't fit can be basically a good example that the thing that you're trying to fit it into, which is your experience, is wrong. I had cognitive behavioral therapy after a car accident, and whenever I was in a vehicle, when it stopped, I would tense up involuntarily, okay, because I was hit from behind. So I would tense up, and it happened every single time the vehicle I was in stopped. I had explained to me how this happens and how you can start to see the world where a triangle that doesn't fit into the square doesn't fit into the square because the square is unjustified. Okay? So all you have to do is pay attention to the triangle or the piece of information that doesn't mesh with your belief that you're saying. So the person who's more apt to understanding or arriving at truths is a person who has this concept that doesn't mesh with their beliefs, and instead of trying to bolster their belief, what they do is they quieten the belief, they leave the belief to the side, and they pay more attention to the phenomenon that's causing the problem. Now that's what I think.
Yeah, I think this varies a lot from person to person. Like everybody's motivated slightly differently, right? And so for you two, I would imagine, certainly for me, there was something that we saw, something that we heard that made us go, hold on, that's a bit full on. We looked into it further. So whether it was Boston bombings or Sandy Hook, whether it was a certain element of the heliocentric story or a certain element of the evolution story or whatever, there was something that caused enough of a jolt to spend more time looking into it, right? Now there's steps along, there's many steps in this process. I'm on one step now, there's more steps to come. I'm sure it's the same case for most people in the chat. There's steps and steps and steps. But something has happened where people have said, actually, my previous understanding was completely wrong. And one of the things that George Orwell wrote about was this idea that, like, in order for the masses to become conscious, they have to rebel, and in order to rebel, they have to become conscious. And for me, one of the things that I sort of take from that is this idea of, well, if you go to school and you do relatively well, and you go to university and you get an okay degree, and you get an okay job, and you get an okay wife, and you spend your money in a way that makes you happy, you've got a lot less reason to question everything that's going on than the person who was doing fine until they had a car accident and insurance didn't pay out, or until their mother was dying and the medicine seemed to make them worse, or until something happened, something that goes bad happens to them, right? Now, if you think about that, if that's an okay framework of looking at what's going on here, a lot of the people who are going to find themselves in this scene, they're not necessarily going to be successful in the way that the system tells us is success, because if you're successful the way the system tells us, you've got less reason to pause and question these things in the first place. Now, a lot of the people who aren't successful in this system that we've been given, they're people who maybe their social skills aren't as good as perhaps they might like, or perhaps their confidence isn't as nice as they might like, or perhaps they had an upbringing that had a number of other problems as well, or what have you. There might be more reason that it's harder for them to relate to others anyhow, you see? And so they're even more vulnerable when someone's offering them a social alternative. Like, here's a social group now that you can fit in with. And we come from a diverse group of backgrounds. All of us reject the system that in many ways rejects you. And our main common thing is we think Boston was fake, or we think that this other thing is true, or what have you. And I think there's a lot of people, they're probably more susceptible to it than they want to admit or they want to realize. And I use texts like 1984 as like a classic. There's far more going on in that book than most people seem to realize. And this is one of the things that I took from it, that there's always going to be, for whatever reason, there's going to be a small group who understand more than the next group, and then there's going to be another group who just don't care altogether, you see? And I think a lot of people right now, I mean, if I were to ask you and Nathan, and I know that we've got to sort of wrap the show up soon, so I'll try to get this on quick. If I was to ask you and Nathan, suppose somehow we put you two in charge, right? Like you two, and maybe there was a council of the flat earthers who were actually in charge of education and the media in this country. What would you want the schools and the televisions to be telling people? You know what I mean? Like if we put you in charge and somehow there was no way they could stop you, you get the airwaves, you get the schools, what would you want them to be telling the people?
I would want. Do you want to go first, Nathan?
No, I don't have an answer.
Okay. I'm gonna approach the question as it was intended. I'm not gonna say I would find a group of consultants and let them deal with it. So, what would I have the mainstream announce? Is that the question?
Well, okay, maybe I should premise a question with one of the things that Orwell talks about is this idea that you've got your top group of the pyramid, and you've got a smaller group below them. So you've got the inner party, outer party, and then the proles, right, the masses, right? And one of the things that he argues was the people in the outer party will occasionally take over the inner party. They'll have a revolution, right? So they're always fighting the people who know what's going on, the people who know enough of what's going on to not like it. They're always jostling for position at the top. But the majority of people, the proles, they don't care either way. They're going to wash their clothes, hang up their clothes, go to work, drink their alcohol, forget the past, like really quickly. Speak to the average person on the street today. They don't even really remember what they were doing a few years ago. Seriously, it boggles the mind. You give me a year and I'll tell you where I was living, what I was doing, who I was hanging out with, right? To me, that's just, it's not hard to remember that stuff. And that's despite the fact that for the first half of my 20s, I used to consume way too much alcohol. I can still remember what I was doing each and every one of those years. Speak to the average person. Just speak to the average person and ask them about a certain time in their life. Their memories are terrible. That's another thing that Orwell writes about, right? The proles, what do they care? They don't even remember. That's why the people who run the show are able to change things so rapidly.
Yeah.
Like, so rapidly. When I was a child, it was still okay for people to not like the idea of their child becoming a homosexual. Like it wasn't, oh, you're a bad parent if you want your child to prefer the opposite gender, right? I'm only 28. Now they're teaching children in school, like there are some schools where they're trying to get rid of gender pronouns. So instead of he or she, they're like, you see what I'm saying? So they can change things in 20 years. Why? Because most of the proles, they don't even remember what was going on 20 years ago. They're moronic, whether they've been trained that way or programmed that way. They've got no idea what's going on. And so I wonder how many people who hate the people who run the show right now, they simply would want to be in that position teaching the proles their version of the truth. You see?
Yeah. So I'll give you my answer. My answer is I wouldn't announce a thing. If I was running things, I would start a system for changing the things quietly, you know, without too much discord, without too much disillusionment, without too much friction. But the honest truth is, if that was the position, I would quit immediately. If they said, okay, there you go, you know, you've got an audience with the Queen and she's going to propel you, and I said, no thanks, I'm painting. That's the truth. You know, I wouldn't want to be in that position. I don't think Nathan would. I think
No, I wouldn't ask that.
No.
Because there's a notion that if you're going to have a large group of people, whether it's 1,000 or 10,000 or 1 million or 100 million or whatever the story is, there are going to be some people who want to be at the top, and there are going to be some people who know that one of the ways to stay at the top is to teach the masses nonsense stories. You know, become the authority. Like, think about that word, authority, author. You're the authority. You're the one writing the story. They're believing your story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even the language that we're speaking in right now, English. Most people have no idea where that language came from. We're communicating English right now, you see? So there's an authority that is at the top. And even if you guys don't want to be at the top, someone's going to want to be at the top. And I think a lot of flat earthers, if you listen to the way that they speak, if it were them in charge of the schools and televisions, they'd be teaching that the earth is flat, you see? Like that would be what they would do. Instead of teaching children who are 5 years old that they live on a giant spinning ball hurtling around the sun, they'd be teaching them that the earth is flat, you know, and that there are super fast planes that fly between the different southern continents, or that there are wormholes that they fly between, or we haven't quite worked that one out yet, but science has worked out a lot so far, so the next thing it's going to work out is how those flights exist between Australia and South America. You see what I mean? But the earth is flat. You can trust us. We're teachers, we're doctors, we're scientists. We've got you see what I'm saying? They would just replace one truth with their truth. And they would say, well, that's okay for us to do that because this is true to us. For all you know, the people who are running the televisions truly believe in heliocentrism.
I'm convinced that they do, that they really do believe in the heliocentrism. Say again, Nathan?
We all did.
Yeah.
So absolutely, they do. Same as the reporters who tell us about Sandy Hook believe that they're telling us the truth. They don't think that they're punting rubbish.
Yeah, but also same the weathermen who tell us that the Chicago skyline is a mirage, and then goes Rob Skiba and his pal and film it going away and then going back. And this is not a mirage; it's there beyond the curvature. So, as far as the flights go, one of the reasons we were looking at the sun is we're trying to look at how the world is actually shaped. Then we can arrive at speeds that must be flown, rather than just take what we're given. And you know, we're told on the Gleasons that that's the distance, and we're told on the globe that that's the distance, different distance. Okay, we're told that. We don't know that. We have no idea how far they actually are. We have no idea how big the thing is. Like really, we have no idea. We do know that Antarctica doesn't see the sun all day and all night like the North Pole does at lower latitudes than the northern latitudes. So we had somebody called from Norway and from Murmansk, which is right next to it. They were seeing the sun at 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning above the horizon. The sun was around here at the time, and they were looking at the sun directly due north. And we have photographs from Antarctica, from here, of the sun setting in the middle of the Antarctic winter. With this globe, it genuinely doesn't work because it has to be oriented a bit more than the 23.4 degrees for Norway and Murmansk to see the sun, quite a lot more for them to see it, and the same with Antarctica. They see it in the north, they don't see it in Antarctica. How the stars move, let's find out. This is what the majority of the bona fide cetetic inquiry minds That's how we approach the world. Let's find out. Let's not take what we're told. Let's find out.
This is a message from Jeren. So do your own research. So maybe I do have an answer. If I had control of the TV, I'd hijack Jeren's message.
Yes. There you
Well,
go.
I can see that I can see you getting tired there, Nathan. It's late where you guys are, but I've just got like 2 more topics really quickly I wanted to get your thoughts on,
Cool.
and then if you want to wrap it up, you can. But there are 2 more things I wanted to talk about. One of them is Nikola Tesla. I saw that Rob Skiba on the show yesterday was talking about Nikola Tesla, this great man, and I've heard many people in this scene talking about Nikola Tesla, this great man, this man whose work was stolen or repressed or whatever. And hey, maybe these stories are true, but I wonder how many people have spent time looking into Tesla. There's a video on my channel, people can go and check it out. I call it Nikola Tesla, a Scientism Priest. If you look into Tesla, you'll find out that according to the Tesla Society, like the official version of Tesla, they say that, and they give sources like the Albany Telegram, they say that Tesla was saying things like he communicated with Mars, he was getting signals from Mars, he even thought there might be life on Mars, and that was back sort of everywhere from the very early 1900s through about 1920, 1922, right? That he was saying that he received communications from Mars, that communication might be from intelligent life. Now, if that's the case, he was doing this well before the programming really kicked in about life being out there, right? Like, this is back. I mean, really, even when I was like 7 or 8, X-Files was still a fringe show. Oh, those loonies who believe in aliens. Now everyone does. In the space of 20 years. That's like the majority of young people in Australia today. Like, there was a study, I'll have to make a video about this.
Sorry, I keep interjecting. It goes one step further than that. They're a mathematical certainty now.
Yeah,
and that's because of Drake's equation, right? And so how many people know what Drake's equation is? Like, Drake's equation is literally like 7 or 8 assumptions multiplied by one another. That's what Drake's equations is, right? That's what it is. I'm not even making that up. So in the space of 20 years, we've gone from alien belief being this fringe, loony thing to now the majority of people believe it. That's how powerful programming is. But Tesla was saying this 100 years ago, right? Now, if Tesla...
One second, John. One of your biggest with which to study the world is skepticism. And you've gone to the Tesla Society, which is obviously not run by Tesla, and they say that he said, but you're not using the same inquiry mind, the same skeptical mind to see whether this is true or not. Did Tesla say this? I've read Tesla's Colorado Spring Journal. It's written in his handwriting. It takes a long time to see it, and it's scrolled. Some of it is really small, some of it's on the sides, loads of diagrams, loads of really convoluted things. It doesn't mention anything about Martians in it. It does mention, teleporting thoughts through modulating wavelengths and various different things, some really cool things. But it doesn't mention, in nothing that I've read, written by him or about him, does it mention him receiving messages from Mars. He did say that he received messages from the ether and that he received messages from the elsewhere. But Mars, I'd never read that. So I urge you, if you're looking into Nikola Tesla, to look at the FBI files. They're public now. You can do a search. You'll find the whole cache, and read them and see whether this is one individual. You'll see by the handwriting whether it's one individual or a series of individuals coalesced into one. And you're 28, and this is, I'm not going to say you're too young to know, but when I was 18, Tesla was not very well known. Like, really, right now everybody's heard of Tesla. Back then, no. There were very few people who knew about Tesla. We were not taught about Tesla at school. We're not taught about Tesla when we were doing electronics, when we were doing physics. We were not taught about Tesla. In fact, the only time that the word Tesla was used was when we were studying electromagnetism, because the electromagnetic unit is called a Tesla. Other than that, nothing. We weren't told anything about ohms either, the resistance. So there are characters that aren't really talked about. And one of them is, well, they are now. Back then, he was literally written out of history. It wasn't history that brought him back. It was independent research that brought him back. And his records were sequestered by the FBI. That he was a real character that really was born in Serbia, that really did do these things. That's something that people can actually ascertain by, we can say if we live in 1984, everything can be planted. But there are things that are, I don't know, remote control, for instance, the origins of remote control, it goes back to Tesla, and it was written, it's too convoluted to say that he was a planted character, because Mark Twain wrote about him. And, it's a big area, but I urge you to use your skeptical mind when you're looking into Tesla regarding stories about him.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you say we have to be skeptical about him, I completely agree. And so I was skeptical about this Tesla guy. I hear all of these people in this scene talking about Tesla being this great guy, and I'm like, well, I don't know anything about this Tesla guy other than I used to play Command and Conquer, a very popular video game when I was a child. I used to play a lot of video games. Command and Conquer, there's these things called Tesla coils. They zap the humans, right? Or they zap stuff, right? That's all I know about Tesla. So I started looking into Tesla, and the first thing, and then people can see this in that video. I'll see if I can send you guys a link. You can put it in the info box below this. I find the Tesla Society, and they release a big document about Tesla, and they provide links for all of they provide sources for all of their quotes, right? So let me read you out a quote that they say that this is from Tesla, right? Quote, 22 years ago, while experimenting in Colorado with a wireless power plant, I obtained extraordinary experimental evidence of the existence of life on Mars. I had perfected a wireless receiver of extraordinary sensitiveness, far beyond anything known, and I caught signals which I interpreted as meaning 1, 2, 3, 4. I believe the Martians use numbers for communication because numbers are universal. And, quote, that was 1922. They provide their source, if you go to the footnotes, as the Albany Telegram, right? Then, 13 years later, they say that Tesla said, in, quote, in 1899, while experimenting with a wireless receiver of extraordinary sensitivity, I detected faint signals from Mars, our brother planet. I could not interpret the signals, but they seem to suggest a numerical code 1, 2, 3, 4, and quote 11. And then they cite their source from that as an interview that Tesla performed with somebody. I can scroll down to the footnotes if you like. But the point is, they provide footnotes and sources for their claims. And so what I'm saying here is, these could all be make-believe. They could make-believe all of this stuff, right? But that's their official story of him. And at least I've looked to see where their story comes from. These people telling me that Tesla was this great guy, I want to go and inspect these sources. What are they?
Look, if you really want to find the sources, spend some time. If I can find a link to it, I'll pass it to you. There's a cache. There's basically a folder. It's the Tesla FBI files, because before the FBI existed, it was called something else. I forget what it was called, but it was before it was called the FBI. They sequestered his records, everything. One of the things he did was he developed a system for shielding different countries with electromagnetism, so that nothing that used electronics could move in. And he spread this pattern around to the 4 major superpowers back in the day in portions, so that only when they were working together they could have a unit. That pattern is there. His notes are there. Everything is there. Everything that the FBI took, they catalogued. And due to freedom of information, people in the US who were doggedly determined to get to the bottom of things, it became made public. It was made public, and you can look for it, and you'll find it. And once you find it, just look into it, and you'll see whether it was a real character. I mean, apart from anything else, my grandfather told me about this crazy guy in America. So,
Before we continue to debate Tesla and the authenticity, John, you said there was something else as well that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, so just with the Tesla one, I just want to know from Antonio though, are you saying that you believe what was released by the FBI?
No, well, what was released by the FBI, there are the actual document records. So when they take things in, there's the actual ledgers on which they catalog everything, and then there's everything that was cataloged. So it's the whole thing. It's a huge folder. I mean, in terms of kilobytes, it's not that big, but in terms of material for you to browse through, it's volumes and volumes. If I can find it, I'll pass it to you. And it's
Like, can you see why people like me would say, well, the FBI, I'm not really sure that they're my friends. I'm not really sure that they're worried about the truth. In fact, I
yeah,
think if anything, they might be one of the chief agencies for
yeah.
fooling us, the masses, into believing in the lie system. Can you see why I'd be skeptical of them as a source?
Oh, totally, and so was I. You know, I'm not so green. You know, I thought, like, why would they be releasing this? Then you have to look at, you know, I've known people who actually worked for the authorities, like for the authorities with badges and, you know, handcuffs. There are real people that really do work with real organizations, and they do keep records. And there are mechanisms set into law, which is this boring thing, but it's there, that people can engage with. And so these things exist. They exist in the US. Earlier I said, you know, if the people in the US think they're living under a dictatorship or a police state, they really need to look elsewhere to see how a police state functions. Because you can question 9/11, Sandy, all of these things, you can question them publicly in the United States. That's a lot of freaking freedom. And that you have an organization that sequesters stuff, yeah, that's true. That you have organizations that can demand that stuff be released, yeah. Do they release all of it? Who knows? But that they do sequester stuff and that they do release stuff, that's true. That is something that really happens. It happens here in the UK too. It happens in Australia. You know, you can
Sure,
go.
like they release stuff and they say what we're releasing is from then, and you've got no way of verifying that.
Oh,
They can
no,
say anything at that point.
But this is the thing. They're not photocopy. Sorry, they're not printouts. They're not typed notes. They're the actual documents photocopied. They didn't
And you
release.
don't think they could be manipulated
If have a look.
or
Have a look.
fabricated?
Have a look. Yeah.
Like I will have a look, but my point is, just as I think people should be skeptical of the Tesla Society, so I'm not telling you that Tesla actually said that he communicated with Mars. I'm saying that's the official story, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you've got a better official story, say from the FBI officials, that's fine too. But just as I'm skeptical of the Tesla Society official story, I'm skeptical of the FBI story to the point where I'm going to try and tell you that I know anything about Tesla, but I've got lots of people telling me that they know that he was a great guy. He was a great guy. All his stuff was stolen. He was repressed. You know what I mean? So they're the ones with the burden of proof is on them because they're claiming to know something, to have knowledge about this character. I'm saying I don't know anything about him, but the official story from the Tesla Society, very fascinating. You know what I mean? Fascinating. Not saying I believe it. It's fascinating. And if we can believe official stories about Tesla, you can't just say, well, I'm going to believe what the FBI said about him, but I'm not going to believe what the Tesla Society says about him. The only reason why you do that is because what the Tesla Society says that Tesla said doesn't fit in with flat Earth beliefs. You see what I mean? It's choosing which officials.
No, all of these things are prior to flat Earth. I spent a while working for a video production company as a researcher. One of the things I was asked to research was everything I could find for a character called Gordon Bennett in the United States. He ran the New York Tribune. I had to find everything in order for a treatment to be written for a film. So I did. One of the things that I discovered, that nobody else had discovered, is that this is the guy who set up the Bohemian Grove. So I do have analytical skills and I can find things. And when I'm saying to you about the FBI files, these are what the FBI released. There's all kinds of stuff that the FBI didn't take that was published earlier, you know, interviews, all kinds of things that he demonstrated, the patterns that are public. But then of the stuff that the FBI sequestered, what they released is available online. I'm not saying they released everything, but what they did release is available online. And when you check, when you cross-reference handwriting, you're calling for a huge conspiracy where somebody has handwritten notes and then learn how to mimic the handwriting, and then handwritten books, volumes, you know, journals filled with diagrams, with tiny writing. All of it.
This will go round in circles for eternity. Sorry, guys, I have to stop you eventually because you will both make the same point again and again and again. But it does raise one interesting question, which is primary sources. I mean, in terms of actual books that you guys have had your hands on, I mean, I asked this question to Jeremy. I think he said the oldest book he'd actually got hold of was about 500 years old. What about you two guys?
In terms of the actual physical book, how old the physical book was? Yeah, no, not older than the 70s. Me.
No?
Yeah, not more than a few decades for me.
Yeah.
That I would know of. Like maybe I was at a library once and read a much older book than that, but it wouldn't be much older than that. Most of us we're working off books that are relatively young, and that alone should raise some red flags for people. You would think.
Yeah, but you had another point, John. You said you've got a couple of things you want to bring up.
Yeah, well, just quickly, hanging out with AB last night and earlier today, like it dawned on me that me sitting here talking about how there are certain stories that most people take for granted that I don't accept anymore. I don't think if you look into them, you're going to accept them. There is a risk that you create a vacuum, that the wrong people, even well-intentioned people, but the people fill that vacuum with nonsense. That's a risk that you take. And I do see this Mandela effect nonsense. I'm seeing it affect people. I'm seeing people buy into it and really believe that history is being changed before our eyes with things like, say, the titles of television shows. And people who 6 months ago would have said, like if you said to me, oh, it used to be Sex in the City and now it's Sex and the City, I'd be like, well, nobody who I respect in this scene would push such nonsense. Now I'm starting to see people push this, and I'm thinking to myself, you weren't always this dumb, and now you're trying to tell me that Sex and the City used to be Sex in the City. And that's just one example of many. And I see this Mandela effect, whether it's an organic thing or it's inorganic, it's not really so important.
I think it's been predictively programmed into a lot of people alongside a lot of heliocentric programming and science fiction. So this is a notion that we have definitely been predictively programmed with, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the Mandela effect, when you think about it, what the Mandela effect, if you said earlier, what does it serve? When you look at something and you say, what does this serve? Okay, so what does the Mandela effect serve? It serves the simulation hypothesis. That's what the Mandela effect serves. Simulation hypothesis or simulation theory. They call it simulation theory, so it sounds a little bit more formidable, because a hypothesis is a bit more wishy-washy. Okay? The whole idea that everything could be just a computer game and we could all be avatars being played by ourselves or our spirits or some other frigging thing, or some of us could be non-player characters. This is a psychotic thought. It's basically the skeptical argument with a psychotic spin on it, because you have people in psychiatric wards who think that other human beings are not real human beings. They are just a character being played. Okay, there are certain things that psychotic, the person who's called psychotic, there are a range of things that are manifested in lots of different people who are psychotic, a number of things. There'll be lots of individual things, but usually a messiah complex, persecution, auditory effects, certain ideas about the world and how the world works. So these things...
Just because I want to wrap the show up pretty soon, can I get from both of you your most comical Mandela example that anybody's given you?
Comical?
Yeah, so I was at a train station a couple of weeks ago, and there's a gentleman who I met, like I've met him in real life, I know him, I've been at Christmas events that he's been at, and he's a lovely fellow. And I know that he's following the flat earth scene pretty closely. Like the last Christmas event that we caught up at, we had a chat about it, and it was all very interesting anyhow. I saw him at a train station a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, hey man, I won't say his name, I was like, hey man, how are you? Oh yeah, good man. I'm like, are you still following the flat earth scene? And he's like, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but he's like, yeah, but that's not the interesting thing anymore. And I'm like, well, what is? And he goes, have you heard of this Mandela effect? And I was like, yeah, I've heard of it. What's your take on this Mandela effect? And he starts saying to me, oh, it's definitely going on. And I'm like, have you got some examples? I'll give you the examples he gave me. Coca-Cola. And I'm like, I haven't even heard that one yet. Like this I honestly don't know. Tell me. And he's like, he goes, when I was younger, it was Pepsi-Cola. He gave another example, cola. Coca-Cola. Now, Coca-Cola. And I was like, oh no, oh no. Like, I won't say his name. Let's pretend his name was Gaza. I'm like, Gaza, no, man, you're better than this. Like, this, please. Then, Sex in the City. Sex in the City. Now it's Sex and the City. All right? Now, because we live in such a perverse society, there are little children watching shows like Sex and the City when they're young. sadly, I was one of them. When I was like 10, 12 years old, I was hearing about things that I shouldn't have been hearing about, especially not from that show and from the producers of that show, right? And I specifically remember it being Sex and the City. And I remember even as a young person hearing other people say in, I'm like, why do you keep saying in? It's and. It says it there in the TV guide. Sex and the City. Like, it's so obvious. Why do you call it in, right? Now I've got people trying to tell me, no, man, it was definitely in, right? They really believe this shit. They really believe it. In their minds, it's not a belief. It's real. They're changing history on us with things like Sex and the City and the brand of Coke, right? That's how easily taken in people will be once you rock their foundation. And so one of the things I wanted to make sure I did on this show was not speak too much about what I've found, just encourage people to do their own research. And then also, even if you find that a lot of stories you've been given are nonsense, it doesn't mean that things like Mandela effect are true, okay? Those things are still, many of the arguments put forward are ridiculous, and the only people pushing them are the misled or the misleading. And sometimes people are both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. From me, Nathan?
So you got a ridiculous Mandela. I mean, mine was the guy saying that the guess what, the stars twinkle. And he even prefaced that by saying, I know there's that song, Twinkle, Twinkle, but I had a look and they actually do. And you think, this is an example of Mandela? Are you having... you just can't believe the level of... It actually is ignorance. You know, it's ignorance. People who haven't looked at something, then they look at something and realise that their belief or their understanding was wrong. And then they attribute that to this nonsense Mandela effect. It's like utter horseshit. But then, like Antonio said right at the start, there is a slightly darker and more nefarious connection, which is definitely there, and it's the link to the simulation hypothesis, and that spans back to the skeptical argument. Am I phrasing that correctly, Antonio?
Yeah.
So you know there is slightly more to it than just to laugh it off as people's ignorance, which is the cause. But yeah, it does bug me. It's one of the biggest bugbears. So to hear somebody else saying, how can people lower themselves to this? It's encouraging to hear it.
Well,
another point on that is that I don't listen to flat Earth shows as much as I used to. There's a couple that I'll still listen to either regularly or semi-regularly, and I still get certain things from it as well, right? Like there's still ideas that they'll bring up that I'd never heard of. Like Rupert Sheldrake. If it weren't for me following the flat Earth scene, I wouldn't know who Rupert Sheldrake is, right? I hear people talking about Rupert Sheldrake. I'm like, who is this clown? Look into him. Oh, he's definitely a clown, right? Never would have heard of him if I hadn't been following this scene. So I still get something from it, right? Are you with me? Anyway, I was following Flat Earth a lot more closely last year when I was hosting a show that had Flat Earthers as guests. And I noticed some of the other shows that were around, either then or afterwards, spent considerably more time talking about the Mandela effect than they did about, say, the Cavendish experiment, right? Now, the Cavendish experiment, there's no conspiracy here. There's nothing outrageous here. It is, look at the official story. Do you believe that? Here's a man in a shed without the light bulb using an apparatus to determine the mass of the Earth. Do you believe that? If you do, okay. I'm not going to... There's no need to go further here, okay? If you believe that kind of thing, you can have that belief. No problems, right? Easy. No conspiracy, no outrageous things. Just here's the story. Do you believe it? You do? You don't? Great. Right? That makes a lot more sense to talk about than the Mandela effect, where they're changing history somehow. Like they've got a magic switch where they... Can you see what I'm saying? It's utterly ridiculous. Like, if you want to talk about one because it's kind of interesting, no problems, man. We've all got interesting ideas. But the idea that people are trying to tell you that they've got a movement that's going to change the world, and they're talking about ridiculous shit significantly more than they're talking about things that are true according to the official story, makes no sense to me.
Well, this is one of the things that I've mentioned this before. One of the things that happens is you see people's true colours pretty quickly, It's just something that I've experienced, Nathan's experienced, lots of people have experienced it. People come in, people appear, say stuff, oh, very good, carry on, and then start saying stuff that you think, what the hell are you talking about? And the way they behave with others, you think, oh, this is a bit odd. And eventually their true colours come out. There's somebody, I won't mention names, but this happens, okay? People come, they push one way, and then they start to bring in other elements. And because we're all conspiratorial minded, we're all always on the lookout for being infiltrated with bullshit. And I've spotted a couple of people. Nathan spotted the same. So if we go back to the whole Mandela effect, the hypothesis, the simulation hypothesis, the skeptical argument, if you go back in time, I'm not talking in a Mandela effect type way. I mean, really, if you go back in time, you have the Matrix. The Matrix took the skeptical argument, which is a philosophical argument. That's all it is. It's an argument. It's called the skeptical argument because it's a good way of demonstrating how strong your evidence has to be in order for it to have any weight. Okay, so you have the skeptical argument. Everything could be just a dream. Yeah. Okay. That's basic. That's the crux of it. That's the most elemental sense. Everything could be a dream. You have that turned into the Matrix. Everything could be a computer-generated program with real organic human beings being used as batteries, with brainwaves being sent to them to perceive life and existence so that it don't just die. And now we have this simulation hypothesis which says we don't know what's going on, but look, CERN is doing things, and black holes and gravitational waves, and look, history is being changed. Maybe we really are in a kind of dream game state, and that is bullshit. It's just straightforward
today,
bullshit.
Aliens, tomorrow, time travel, parallel universes. Sound familiar? It's because we've had this shit for 30 years on our TV, subtly dropped in with space travel.
Yeah, and so I think people who can see that there's some nonsense involved in this, they're probably doing a good thing when they point it out, when they say, hold on, you're spreading stuff now that doesn't seem to be based on empirical evidence, and it could have a negative effect on people's minds, and this could be the start of something that gets bigger and bigger. One generation from now, we could have a whole bunch of people walking around actually believing that history can be changed, the titles of movies can be changed by some sort of flick of the switch or something. Do you know what I mean? So skepticism, I think, has a very useful role to play. No matter what you see this scene as, I think it's got a useful role to play. And I think a lot of people, I mean, even in the live chat right now, they're saying bad shit about me, right? I think a lot of those people, they're only upset at me when my skepticism is applied to their belief system, whether their belief system is true or false. They don't like it when I apply my skepticism to them. If I just focused on the other side, they'd love me. Because they did. 12 months ago, they loved the Baller Skeptic Roundtable when I was applying the skepticism to heliocentrism. They loved me, right? Then I started applying it to flat Earth. I'm the devil. I'm all these bad things. You see?
I don't see many comments against you right now at all. And it could be because you're not attacking the flat Earth like you're saying. But,
I think John means generally,
Yeah. People have called me the devil. They call Nathan a psychopath continuously. The name calling, it's not important. Somebody has pointed out a really cool Mandela effect, and it's Globebusters who pointed out that Ghostbusters stole their name.
Well, yes. I think
my mate Gaza, I reckon he's not far off believing that. I mean, some people take this stuff to the extreme. You know what I mean? There's one more thing before we wrap it up too. Have you guys heard of the banana ladder monkey experiment?
The banana ladder?
Oh, it's really cool. You're going to love this, right? So you know how people just seem to chastise other people the way that they were chastised, and it just goes on and on? Well, there was an experiment that proved this. You're going to love it, right? They took a whole bunch of monkeys and they put them into a cage. In the middle was a ladder, and at the top was bananas, right? And what happened was the monkeys want the banana, but these experimenters had a few people lined up with hoses ready to go. And so as soon as one of the monkeys tried to climb the ladder, they hosed that monkey down. All the monkeys got hosed if even one went up the ladder, right? Happened again. Pretty soon the monkeys worked out, if one of us climbs that ladder for the bananas, we're all getting sprayed, we're going to start tearing them down. So what happened was, as soon as the monkey went to go up the ladder, he was teared down by the rest. Anyhow, no more monkeys going up the ladder. They take one monkey out, they replace him with a fresh monkey. That monkey goes to run up the ladder, he gets pulled down by all the other monkeys, right? They know, but he doesn't, but he soon learns, don't run up the ladder. You see? Don't do it. He soon learns that. So what they're able to do is slowly remove the original monkeys and then replace them one by one with new monkeys who've never been sprayed. And yet, the cultural practice continues. No one goes up the ladder. To the point where you've literally got no monkeys in that cage that have ever been sprayed, but no one's going up that ladder. fascinating story, isn't it? I heard that story from a lady named Laurie Ferrari. Now, she seems like a nice lady. I've got nothing against her. She, of course, runs that show, Flat Earth Conspiracy or what have you. I heard her talk about that probably best part of a year ago now on her show, and I was like, I know that that story is bullshit. That study never happened. And the reason I know that is because one of my mates here in Brisbane, who I met at university, who's not into the scene at all, tried to tell me that same story as justification for some other nonsense a couple of years ago. And I was like, really? That seems like a cool story, but I'm going to double check it. Because if it's true, that's a great story to use. Because we all know that people just behave the way they're trained to behave. We all know that, right? So if you can use scientific studies, especially with monkeys that kind of seem like us, that's perfect, right? But I'm not going to use that story to prove a point until I've double checked it. So I'm like, I can't lose here. I go and double check the story. My mate's true. I get to use that story now when I try and convince others. Or my mate's wrong, and I'll get to tell him, mate, that story, it's not legitimate. Turns out it's not even close to legitimate. It's a completely fake story. When you trace it back, it goes to some self-help guru from like the 1970s who was like a secondary source, didn't provide a primary source. The experiment never happened, and the closest experiment you can find to it happening is nothing like that. It's a bullshit story, okay? So I made a video where I didn't even reference Laurie Ferrari specifically. I just made a video saying, have you heard of the banana ladder monkey experiment, right? Then I explained bit by bit how when you trace the story back, it's bullshit. Now, Laurie Ferrari, and then I left a comment on her channel saying, hey, Laurie, I've made a video, didn't specifically reference you, but the monkey banana ladder experiment story might not be based on the truth that you think it is. And her response was basically, oh, yeah, it's just a fable, it's just a useful fable, and that was it. And I'm like, well, hold on, you've told a whole bunch of people this story, people being people, they're going to go out and repeat this story. If you knew it wasn't true, you should have said that. And if you didn't know it wasn't true, then own up to it now, fess up to it, you see. Now, again, this isn't me having a go at Laurie Ferrari. Like I said, she seems like a lovely lady. If she was in Brisbane, I would take her out to coffee and say, here's Brisbane, let me show you my city. Like, I've got nothing against her. But I use this story of an example of how, one, we love to use stories to make our point. Very few people double-check those stories. And then when you prove that the story is bullshit, very few people come and say, thank you for stopping me from spreading bullshit there, Jono. If it weren't for you, I'd still be spreading bullshit. They get angry about it, or they pretend it never happened and moved on. So there's not many things that come from being the kind of person to double-check stories, okay? And really, what am I doing? That monkey banana ladder experiment story, people love that story. I'm sure when I was telling that story right now, a moment ago, when people who hadn't heard it before, they would have loved hearing it. Like, what a great story. You're taking away people's ways of relating to the world around them. And being a skeptic doesn't get many thanks these days, I'll tell you.
Yeah, but it's easy to check things. Universities have university archives, and all their published papers are available. So all you have to do is find the study, find the actual study. It will tell you, what department conducted it, who was in charge of the study. It will tell you all the details. You can then read the study, If you don't find the study, it's because it didn't happen. I'll tell you something that was interesting when I was checking the background of somebody. Mark Zuckerberg, his mother's a psychiatrist, but she's not registered as a psychiatrist in the US. So where is she a psychiatrist? She's not in the register. I can't find her. So what kind of psychiatrist is not registered as a psychiatrist? Interesting, huh?
Don't get me started on psychiatry. Like, that's one of the biggest fields of quackery you'll ever find. I mean, how many people have looked into the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, the DSM? It's up to like its 5th edition now. Just go and look at the 4th edition or the 3rd edition. Look at the changes between the editions. Psychiatry is absolute quackery.
Yes.
Don't even get me started.
Definitely. You're sounding like
people out there still believe that if you take medicines, it changes the chemicals in your brain, right? Like, oh, they've got depression. There's a chemical that's missing from their brain. So give them this, put this thing in their mouth, it goes into their body, and their body puts it in their brain, and it makes them better. Problem is, that was debunked officially more than 10 years ago. But there are still people who believe it to this day. So you can debunk something. Even the official authorities can admit that something's been debunked, but people will still hold on to those beliefs. If it helps them to understand the world around them, or if they think it helps them to understand the world around them, they'll still hold on to that explanation even when it's been debunked. Whether it's monkeys pulling other monkeys off a ladder to stop them from getting sprayed by a hose, taking a pill to change the chemicals in their brain, whatever stories they have to help them understand or think they understand the world around them, there's a very good chance they're going to hold on to those stories and attack anyone. I mean, I don't bring up psychiatry now around people who I know who are on medications. And most people are these days. You'd be amazed how many people in Australia either are on antidepressants or have been. It's an epidemic going on right now, right? So I've got to be very careful when I talk about these things. If I'm in a room and I know that someone either has or previously been on medications, I don't say that psychiatry is quackery, because if you say to them, no, dude, like, this isn't my story, they officially admit it, that they can't prove there's a chemical change in the brain, but they've admitted it. I've been attacked for that, you see? You get attacked by, and I think a lot of it comes down to what we were saying earlier about people are insecure. Like, ultimately, people get most offended when they're insecure about something. So if you're standing there confidently saying, I've actually looked into psychiatry, I've read books on the topic, the DSM, I understand the changes that it's gone through over the last 20, 30, 40 years, right? Well, they don't like that at all, because you're taking away the stories. They were told that there was something wrong with them that was fixable. The bad feelings they have about the world, we can. That's not your fault. That's just a chemical imbalance. We can fix that. Here's a pill. We're going to fix it for you, right? You're taking that away from them. You see? People don't like that one bit. Just look at the live chat for evidence.
Yeah, I tell you what I find very interesting, the number of doctors, MDs, who are coming out against vaccinations. So there's not so many coming out against psychiatry right now, but against vaccination there's a large number. I read this. I used to look into some dark stuff. In terms of the professions and the numbers of suicides, in the medical profession, it's psychiatrists that have the highest count of suicides. Why is that? Are they finding out that they're just pushing stuff that's bullshit? Are they listening to drama stories all day and they're getting driven down? What's the situation? But that's the situation. There are all kinds of dark studies that are conducted, you know, legitimate studies that are really freaking dark out there, you know, and you can find them if you want.
Before we round out, I got one chuckle out of the chat room, and it was right at the very end, just before we round out, and it was I've very deliberately refrained from asking JLB any questions from the chat at all, but there was one that made me laugh, so I thought I'll ask you just before we round out, John. So they lie Ohio says, are you upside down right now?
All right, so do I look upside down? And I know what they're getting at, right? Look, I should have, if I had more time, I would have uploaded that chat that I had with Sean Hufford and Reg Rhetoric and the rest of them. These are full-blown scientism believers, okay? Full-blown. They really believe it. They're completely on board with heliocentrism, evolution, dinosaurs, the whole lot, right? They're just as vociferous in their beliefs as the people in the live chat are right now about their beliefs, okay? Like, I know they see each other as, no, we're right and no, we're right, but their behaviors are remarkably similar, okay? And in that live hangout that I had with them, I said to them, look, if you want to know what I believe about where we live, I'm happy to tell you. Here's what it is. The map is not the terrain, okay? So like if I give you, suppose I live in Queensland, right? Someone gives me a map of Queensland. The map is not the terrain, okay? But if I can use that map to know that if I go in this direction, I'm going to get here. Or if I go in that direction, I'm going to get there. Fantastic, right? But the map is not the terrain. The map is never the terrain. It's just a map. It's a useful tool, okay? The terrain itself, I can feel the terrain. I can see the terrain. It's the terrain. I'm in a house right now. In half an hour, I'll be out walking the terrain with old AB over there, who's got a camera going. What are you recording me right now? And the point of my story is, you've got terrain, you've got maps, okay? The models that we use of the Earth are not the actual Earth. So if I look at all the phenomena around us, I think the best model that I've seen is that we're on a ball, and I'll get to why in a second, but that it's not spinning and it's definitely not going around the sun. There's no reason to believe any of that, right? But when I see things like the two poles, the north celestial pole and the south celestial pole, the rotations around them, when I see that, that leads weight towards a ball or a concave, right? The southern flights make no sense on any of the flat Earth models proposed. They do make sense on a ball, right? Sunsets, to me, the fact that you can go up that big building in wherever it is, in the UAE or whatever it is, and you can see the sunset again a couple minutes later, that kind of thing leads weight to a ball, okay? All of these things give inference weight towards a ball model. Doesn't mean we really live in a ball. It just means that if I had to come up with an explanation, a model for the phenomena that we see, it would be a ball. But it wouldn't be spinning, because I've got no evidence that that's the case, and it definitely wouldn't be going around the sun, because I've got no evidence that that's the case. But the model. You are. Does that mean?
You are upside down.
But does that mean that I'm actually on a ball and I'm down here upside down relative to you? No, it's just a model for explaining the phenomena that we can see. We might be on a ball, we might be on a flat, we might be on a giant spinning ball going around the sun. I don't know, right? But the best model that I've seen is a stationary ball, and it's not a Sun Genus stationary ball because Sun Genus says that there's still this thing called outer space. I don't believe in outer space, you see? I don't believe in space at all. So people saying, oh, JLB is like a Sun Genus promoter, they're either deceived or they're deceiving, and you make up your own mind which it is.
Okay, or they're joking and using tongue-in-cheek. So I have a great question for you, or test for you. Not now, you know, but the next time you fly, okay? At some point you will fly, won't you? John,
Sorry?
You'll fly somewhere, yeah?
At some point I will fly somewhere.
Yeah, so you'll have windows. You'll have windows where hopefully you'll not be sat in the middle of the plane in one of these 3 row planes. You'll be in one that has 2 rows, a left row and a right row. You'll be sat on one row and you'll see the horizon out of your window. Yeah? And it will be at your eye level. I've seen this. So, but then between you and your window and the next row and that window, okay, there's no way that you should see the horizon out of the other window. Absolutely zero. There's no chance that you should on a sphere. This is just not possible. To see it out of your window and believe that it's eye level on a sphere, yes, but not out of the other window. But when you see it out of your window and when you're checking, you know, you're on your own and you're looking like this and you're hoping that nobody's looking at you. You're looking at, okay, I can see it out of this window right here, and I can see it out of that window right there. Okay. That doesn't work on a globe. It really doesn't. And the whole concave Earth, because light bends, like, okay, does light travel straight? This is my question for concave Earthers. Light bends. Okay. First, what's making it bend? Oh, electromagnetism. Okay. Could that electromagnetism not be counteracted upon by equal magnetism from the Earth or from the sky or whatever? But if you say that light bends, then there's a question, does light also travel straight? You know?
Well, it sounds to me like you want a second round, an Antonio versus JLB round 2 is what it sounds like.
Thank God you said that, JLB.
Wait. I was asking, Nathan, sorry. I was asking you when you were asking Bob, go on, Bob, debate me. I was like, no. And I was asking you, like, dude, come on, let's have, I'd love another debate, but a bit more free, you know. I'd structure it better this time because I won't be so. But I'd love another debate on the shape, not on can this be proven or not. You know, you bring yours, I bring mine, put each and see what people think.
Well, I'd be more than happy to have another debate, and I think the last one was largely constructive. And I did release, I think, 2 different videos about the debate where I just cut out the clip, uploaded it, because people are more likely to watch 10 or 15 minutes than they are 2 hours, right? Yep. So I uploaded them with positive titles. I think one was mirrored by one of you and the other was mirrored by the other of you. And if you add up the number of views for those, I mean, it would largely be the same views of the original one, but there'd still be a few new people seeing this stuff as well. And I thought lots of good came out of it. So I personally am glad that we did the first debate. I'd be more than happy to do a second one. The only point that I was making in that live chat with Bob was that Bob is now the one who, and I'm not trying to get into the personalities of this, but Bob is somebody who is misrepresenting what I say to people. He's attacking me in the live chat. At least the videos that I've made of him, I've simply used his words. I've said, this is what he said. Do you believe it? Do you know what I mean? At least I'm letting him speak. My videos about Bob let Bob speak for himself. Whereas in the live chat, he's misrepresenting me, you see? So I've said, well, Bob, if that's the case, why don't we just have a live debate? Very hard for me to misrepresent you or vice versa if we're on a live debate where people can hear what we're actually saying. And so I put the challenge to him. Now, the last time I challenged somebody to a debate was that Brap Allgood character who piked out straight away, and then Antonio, you stepped in and you said, well, let's have a debate. And I thought to myself, well, Antonio, I'm not sure you really understand what my shtick here is, but if you want to have a debate, we can do that. And we did. Now I'm challenging Bob from Globebusters to a debate. I don't go around challenging people to debates very often, but I'm happy to do it right now with Bob. If he wants to keep misrepresenting me, keep saying these things that are patently false about me, where my videos just show his words and say, do you believe Bob's words? Does Bob believe Bob's words? If this is the path he wants to go down, let's just have a debate. Now, I'd prefer to have a debate with Bob next. I think he's the current #1 contender. But if he won't, then it looks like it's me and Antonio round 2, hosted here on Nathan Oakley. Nathan Oakley as ref. What say you?
I say yes.
Well, I say Bob is echoing your sentiments. I mean, I must admit, throughout the night, Bob's been in the chat, and he'll say something, and you'll echo it. So, and vice versa, you know, it's one of those things that, in many ways, I think you have the same feelings. You're misrepresenting what each other says. You're attacking each other in the comments. You know, I think you both have exactly the same feelings towards each other, which I shouldn't be chuckling, but it is kind of comical. Hand on heart, hope it's Bob versus JLB rather than an Antonio versus JLB second round, which, no offense to you guys, you know, I think we've been there, done that, and bought the t-shirt.
No, it will be better, because the other one was a little bit, there seemed to be at first some animosity, and it's not warranted. We don't need animosity. I've seen all kinds of debates where people are, you know, you don't need animosity in a debate.
That's what I was going to round up the show by saying, actually, Antonio. It's a very good point. To all those people who are angry or annoyed at John, specifically at John LeBon sat there, you've got to ask yourself the question, why? Why are you so angry with this one dude? And secondly, all the world's a stage. Every man plays his part, and JLB is playing his part as well. Is there any last points that you guys want to round out the show with?
Yes, I want to give kudos to John, because what he said about tightening your argument before presenting it to a wider audience, yeah, this is why I wanted to debate you, because I saw that that's what you were doing. I don't think you're doing it like to help the flat Earth, but I don't think you're doing it to break or destroy or hinder. I think you're doing it because it's a justified position. You know, you're justified in saying, dude, some of the stuff you say is like, yeah, might be okay. It's not entirely persuasive. Make it entirely persuasive. So yeah, I give you kudos for that.
Thanks, man. Well, look, my final thoughts, I'll try and be quick, because my final thoughts usually take 5 minutes, and it's like 3 o'clock where you guys are, so I'll be as quick as I can. A couple of things, just rounding out the story. We were talking earlier about the land before time. We were talking about dinosaurs, right? These images that children get that they relate to, that they believe. The Land Before Time, and another film, like if I had to ask you, one of the biggest films that have influenced people's beliefs about dinosaurs, you'd probably say Jurassic Park would be up there, right? The Land Before Time and Jurassic Park, there's a name that's behind both of those. It's Steven Spielberg. Now, we didn't spend much time today talking about the Holocaust, but there's a documentary that had a huge effect on people's understandings of that event as well, and it was called The Last Days. Okay, now I strongly recommend anybody who's interested in this kind of thing to look up a film called Spielberg's Hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie. You see, Steven Spielberg won an Academy Award for The Last Days, and yet you can use his own video footage from the Shoah Foundation of the actors that he used in that documentary, telling one story before the film, telling a very different story during the film, and this is meant to be a documentary that was so good that it won an Academy Award, even when it was revealed that the stories that were told in that documentary about the Holocaust were fabricated. There's no Academy Award taken away from Spielberg. Most people to this day would have no idea that this film exposing him even exists. Okay. Now, if you look into Spielberg, he's behind a lot of stories that people take to be true. There's a reason for all of this, and so I strongly encourage people just to start with Spielberg's Hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie, and then just work your way from there. What I'll do is I'll give you guys a link so you can put it in the info box. People can go and check it out. It's on YouTube, right? It's not the best resolution, but it's 2 hours that if you haven't spent watching that documentary, it's either because you haven't heard of it before, and this will be a great thing for you, or you've heard of it, and it's just not as interesting to you as other things, and that's fair enough. But for the people who are interested in this stuff, Spielberg's Hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie, it will change things for you. It changed things for me. And then from there, you can sort of take it wherever you want it. As for me, johnlebon.com, I finally built my website, johnlebon.com. Go and check it out. Whether you agree with me or you disagree with me, I ask questions, I let you answer the questions, I respond to your answers. And I think in the 2 years that I've been here, we've uncovered a lot. We've gotten through a lot, and I'm only just warming up. So I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited that I've got people like Nathan and Antonio who are happy to at least entertain what I have to say. And I think it takes a lot of courage of Nathan in particular to host a show with me on the show. Look at some of the comments that were left on his promo for this show, and look at some of the comments that he's received during this chat just for talking to me, right? And I think if Flat Earth is true, and this is going to go big, if what you guys are onto is a real winner, you're going to need people like Nathan who are willing to listen to people who don't agree with him and are willing to entertain their thoughts, because without that, you get groupthink, and you'll end up like Jeffrey and his Boston Hoaxathon truth scene, and it won't be good for anybody. So a big thanks to you, Nathan, for inviting me on the show and having me on the show, and thanks to you as well, Antonio. And I guess we'll await the next move from Bob, and if Bob wants to vacate #1 contender, then it's round 2. And hey, we'll set it a month ahead. I'll get into my healthy eating and thinking regime, and we'll do it all over again. And this
clarity is, I mean, from watching the chat, Bob's position, as far as I can tell, I hope he doesn't mind me paraphrasing what he said, is that because you won't settle on a firm model for yourself, he won't debate you. That's his stance from what I've read in the chat.
this then, and exclusive. Bob agrees with that, and we said enough. I will come and not only challenge his beliefs, say what you agree with in previous debates. I'll let him put forward my own model so we can see. Then we can just go through one whose model seems to actually know that we can reveal my model once we debate it. But it's kind of pretty I don't see anybody. They're the ones that and obviously the strategic needs, right?
Wait.
We can't hear you, John.
John,
we lost 90% of that.
You went into what was coming through was robotic speech. We couldn't actually hear. Can you test now?
Yeah.
No.
No, I don't think so. No, it's all gone pear-shaped.
John,
You couldn't make it up.
Yeah, John, drop and rejoin. We'll wait for you.
Can you hear me now?
No, it's all gone wrong.
Really? Drop? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, we'll
think
talk amongst ourselves so we can actually have a proper farewell from JLB.
Yeah,
I don't know if the chat agrees. We should hang on just to see what he's got to say.
Yes, I think he's saying he's happy to put his model, his idea up in a debate with Bob. I think that's what I caught. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure he said that he was happy to commit to some sort of model. That's what I got through that garbled nonsense.
Especially having stipulated that the map is not the terrain, which is true. The map is not the terrain. It's only a representation of various aspects of the terrain. You know, obviously, you know, the road is not, you know, 2 millimeters wide. It's, you know, 5 meters wide. Obviously, the map is not the terrain.
Yeah, I mean, JLB, I don't know if you listened to his after debate show that he held, but in that show he was saying that he was surprised by the amount of things that you and he actually had in common, as opposed to things that you had that were in complete opposition. And I think that's something that hopefully Bob, aside from debates and entertaining though they are, you know, I hope Bob sees the same thing. There is a comment that was definitely echoed by both of them throughout the evening. Sorry to paraphrase you, Bob, looking at the comments, which was that we should unite against the powers that should not be. These are the people that are our, not enemy, that's possibly the wrong word, but certainly we've mentioned him before, so why not? Flat Earth Vancouver, Glenn, is not my enemy, you know, far from it. And he feels that people like Patricia are his enemy, and there's a whole group of people that have these feelings towards other people who are in the quote-unquote flat earth movement, the potato crew, and it's complete nonsense. We should direct our attention to people who have genuinely deceived us, you know, upon thorough research. So we're not pointing the finger unnecessarily at people who haven't lied or aren't trying to deceive or are doing it unwittingly, rather than people that definitely know they're lying through their back teeth. Are you back with us, John?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
I've had to come back in as my John Bond Extra channel. The other Google Hangout under my main channel was saying you can't connect to this call right now. Try again in a few minutes. But then, as soon as I log into John Bond Extra, here I am.
It's still not as clear as it was earlier. In fact, it started cutting down when you were saying sure. It sounded to us like you were saying, yeah, you'll come up and you'll express your model. At that, I think that's what you were saying.
Well, can you guys see me like clearly enough now?
Clearly, if you speak a little bit slower, it will be easier for people.
All right. So what I was saying was, like, I said that I thought the first debate, even though it could have run a lot better, obviously there were a few issues that we had, etc., etc. I still think it was productive. I'd be more than happy to do that again.
Okay, I'm gesturing for you to go a little bit slower.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I thought the first debate was productive. I thought good things came out of that. That's why I promoted it afterwards with a couple of videos, and we learnt from that as well. So you'd think the next, if we were to organise another one, we'd organise it better than the first one. So I'm definitely open to another debate. The point I was making with Bob was that at this point in time, given the way that he's conducting himself, perhaps the most productive thing might be to have a debate with Bob. And I understand what Nathan was saying earlier, that Bob says that I'm misrepresenting him, and I'm saying that Bob's misrepresenting me. The big difference is that with Bob, I cut out what he says and I play it for people to see. So I can't misrepresent what you say, you see. Whereas with me, no one's making videos showing what I've said and then showing why I'm wrong, or just questioning people, do you believe what JLB said? So I'm saying, with Bob, I think it would be very healthy if we had a debate, he and I, maybe set it a month ahead. Now then Nathan said, oh, but Bob doesn't want to debate you because you don't have your own model. Well, as a Nathan Oakley exclusive, I will release what I think is the best model that I've come up with, and rather than just debate me saying, you can't prove flat Earth, and him saying, yes, I can, which will just end as previous debates have ended, we can have a debate where we say, well, how about I give you my model, people can also hear your model, we can go through the observable phenomena, and we can see which is the best model of the two, and people can make up their own mind. Now, I would still think that anybody going into that debate believing in flat Earth, especially the ones who have like an emotional attachment to the belief, they're not going to, even if I was right, they're not going to walk away changing their minds, just as the people who are anti-flat Earth and have like an emotional anti-flat Earth bent, even if Bob is right, they're not going to walk away convinced of flat Earth. Like, if you have a debate actually expecting a lot of people to change their minds, it's for the wrong reasons. However, I believe that within any scene, there's a top small group of people who are genuinely open to new ideas and to changing their minds, right? I call it the Le Bon 1991 principle. If we were to have that kind of debate, anyone in that top 1%, maybe the top 10%, they could walk in believing one thing and walk away believing a different thing, or at least changing their thoughts about things, could be very productive. So I usually play the, well, you're the one making the claim, let's scrutinize your claim role, because it's a lot easier, it's strategically smarter, it fits in with my natural skeptic thing. But to sort of meet halfway with Bob, if that's what it takes to get him into a live on-air debate, then you bring your flat Earth belief or models, I'll bring my stationary ball, if indeed that is the best model that I can find in between now and then we'll sit down and we'll have a pleasant, gentlemanly discussion, and I'm sure Nathan Oakley would be more than happy to moderate the whole thing. What say you, Nathan?
Hell yeah. And on that bombshell, I'm going to say another thank you. It's been a very long show, guys, so thank you very much, John Le Bon, for joining us on Mechanics of the Fourth Wall. It really has been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all the listeners who weren't attacking me, all 5 of you. I appreciate it, and I hope you got something from the show.
And thank you, Antonio, as always.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been cool.
It has been good. And to all of you in the chat, some of you have been very well behaved, some of you not so well behaved. But thank you all for tuning in to Mechanics of the Fourth Wall. I've been Nathan Oakley. I will see you all in the next video.